Om Dhyaya Nityam Mahesham Rajatagirinibam Charu Chandravatamsam Ratna Kalpojvalangam Parashumagavarabhiti Hastam Prasannam Padmasinam Samantatsutam Amaraganaevagakitim Vasanam Vishwadyam Vishwabijam Nikhilabayaharam Panchavaktram Drinetram Karpura Gauram Karunavataram Samsara Saram Bhujagendraharam Sada Vasantam Hridaya Aravinde Bhavam Bhavani Sahitam Namami Kailasapita Sanamadhya Samstam Bhaktaischanandhya Dhibisevyamanam Bhaktatidavanalamaprameyam Dhyayed Umalingita Vishwarupam Dhyayed Umalingita Vishwarupam Om Namah Shivaya Om Sthapakaya Cha Dharmasya Sarvadharmaswarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namah Om Yathagne Dahika Shakti Ramakrishne Stithahiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyam Om Bharatatve Sadalino Ramakrishna Samagyaya Yo Dharma Sthapana Rato Viresham Tam Namamyam Viresham Tam Namamyam Om Vireshwaraya Shivaya Namaha Tenarudaya Shivane Potri Enatavargam Ireva Potri 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 Om Shanti Shanti Om Ganga Nishanama Om Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Jaima. So I was interested in revisiting that conversation that we had last night on Shivaratri. We asked this question: what is the entire tradition in a nutshell? Like, if we could just express what makes Shaivism distinctive and how its theologies and epistemological and metaphysical conclusions might make it different from other traditions that you might be used to, what would that thing be? Because last night I was expressing how Shaivism is a really diverse array of traditions. It's not any one thing. Oh, maybe I should do this. Oh, like, oh, whoops. Oh, whoops, I forgot. One second. I forgot to send the Zoom link. Oh. But like, Shaivism is not any one thing. This is important to remember. Like, when we say Shaivism, it's referring to a vast spectrum of different things that mean different things to different people at different times in history. So taking stock of this like tradition called Shaivism, it's naturally like the same question as what is Tantra. Like, the tradition called Tantra is obviously broader than just Shaivism, because there are forms of Tantra that are not Shaiva, like Buddhist forms of Tantra and Vaishnava forms of Tantra, like Pancharatra Tantra, for instance. But even in the Pancharatra system or the Vajrayana system, you can clearly see the Shaiva Tantra influence. And so Shaiva Tantra is arguably the first kind of Tantra, historically speaking. And then that form of Tantra, Shaiva Tantra, becomes very influential in India, so much so that now, if you visit Bharata, India, pretty much every single temple that you visit, I think I would be confident in saying that every single temple that you visit is Tantric, because it was likely founded along agamic lines, meaning it was built based on the revelation of Shiva, which we call the Tantra, but that revelation is also attributed to, say, Manjushri or some other Buddhist deities, or say Vaishnava deities like Narada or something like that. So whatever the case may be, whether it's a Vaishnava temple, say like Shri Vaishnava temple, say Ramanuja's temple, right? It could be something like that. Or it could be, say, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in northeast India. So whether we're talking about Vaishnavism in South India, like Shri Vaishnavism, or Vaishnavism in northeast India, like Bengali or Gaudiya Vaishnavism, they have temples. And in those temples, rituals are performed in order to create a kind of spiritual atmosphere. And in that spiritual atmosphere, they articulate their own ideas, their own philosophies, their own spiritual practices. But the temple culture itself, though it's occurring in a Vaishnava context, is distinctly tantric. So when people say Tantra, they often have in mind some very like fringe, esoteric, and maybe deleterious practice that is about like cremation grounds and black magic and the acquisition of power for power's sake. And that's the kind of rep that Tantra has. So especially now in India, if you say the word Tantra, it comes with a certain kind of connotation that you are maybe somebody who is interested in power, who is willing to do anything and everything to acquire that power, and likely you are involved in rituals of a somewhat, if not degenerate, at least macabre nature, because it'll take you into the world of like cremation grounds and things like that, right? So this is very important. Like, that's what Tantra comes to mean for a vast majority of people who use the word. Like in India, that's been the case for like hundreds of years, if not like thousands, at least 1,000 years. That might have been the case. The word Tantra, it's a fairly new movement as far as like the formal word and tradition is concerned, like 580, 680. But since then, arguably, it's acquired somewhat of a bad rep. Now, in the West, the word Tantra has more of like a late-stage capitalism, consumer capital kind of thing. Like it has like this kind of like, what do you call it? Like, it has this kind of bad rep in the sense that it's usually kind of consumer capitalist. It's like, oh, it's like a workshop meant to maybe increase one's engagement with the world in a way that's like quasi-spiritual or something. And then through that, we sell workshops or something like that. So it becomes a product. It becomes a product in the new age that references things in India that may or may not be called tantric. So the word tantra itself is a term that we have to define. So when we're having conversations and we're using the word tantra, we have to be open to the possibility that we mean vastly different things by that word. Whether it's in the West and we're conditioned by the Western use of that word, or in the East and we're conditioned by the Eastern use of the word Tantra itself is kind of contentious. Just like the word Shaivism is contentious. The thing to remember here, most importantly, is that Tantra, whatever its perceptions might be, whatever its connotation might be in whatever cultural context it's used, the word itself implies a scriptural, textual tradition. So a Tantra is a book, or rather a genre of spiritual literature, and it essentially is a padati. So a Tantra is essentially a ritual manual. So already in the beginning, you see the emphasis in the Tantric tradition, as far as we're considering it to be a textual and scriptural tradition, is practice-oriented. So Tantra is mostly interested in telling you how to conduct a ritual. So even the word upachara, we were talking just now, we're making an offering, we're trying to find the right Sanskrit word for chai with milk versus chai without milk. Like shiram sahita or cha is the participle cha and better than the sahita or just a compound word like shiram, chai, and we're having this discussion about Sanskrit grammar and we're thinking, what if you don't know the Sanskrit word for an offering? Well, technically the word in Sanskrit for offering that you make in the context of puja is just upachara. And the word chara in Sanskrit means to move. Achara means the right movement, the proper code of conduct that one should carry out. And that's going to be different as per the context. So like, what's the proper code of conduct on the golf course? Well, it's going to be unique to the golf course, right? It'll have to do with the game called golf, which I know nothing about. What's that?
A good walk.
Yeah. Mark Twain's a good walk ruin. But like, there's a way to ruin that walk. You like go from this hole to that hole, and it's like Thakur's example about digging many shallow holes. But like, there's a way to be in a golf course, right? And that's different from how you would be in a baseball court or a basketball court, something like that. Like, the way to conduct yourself in a place is relative to that place, to that set and setting. And that's true of traditions too. The way you do a ritual, the way you relate to other people in that community, the way you practice spirituality in your own personal practice, the way you relate to God even, whether or not you even have a God in that tradition, all of that is called achara. Code of conduct, or like charya, the way you carry yourself, or the way you relate to others, or the way you relate to the tradition as a whole. Now, if chara means to move, achara means to be moving according to that context, or that code. So, upa means like something like close to or with. So like Upanishad, like that, upa, or upanaya, or something, the word upa guru, something like that. So upa achara, like upa achara, so upachara means item that you offer. So there's a way to offer, and there are things to offer, and all of those things are defined and instructed through these books called tantras. Essentially, tantra is upachara shastra, or charya shastra. It tells you what to do. And therefore, different tantras, meaning different texts, exist within different contexts because they might be means to different goals. So that's another question. It's like, we're using words like tantra and Shaivism, but we have to take a step back and ask, like, what's our goal? Like, what do we want? And why do we use the word tantra and Shaivism? Because what is it about those two words that for us means we'll get that? That's the question of sankalpa, the question of intent or ichcha, will. If I'm going to the golf course, it's presumably because I want to play golf. If I want to play basketball, I probably won't be at the golf course. But I have to understand that the rules and codes of conduct in the golf course are for the game of golf. And if I'm interested in that game, then it makes sense for me to learn the codes of conduct called golf. But if I'm not interested in playing golf, who cares? Why would I take the time to learn how to play golf? I don't know how to play golf. And I frankly, unfortunately, have no interest in playing golf. But some people do, and that's wonderful. It's wonderful for the people who want to play golf to have a way to go to the golf course and have a way that they themselves feel like they should act in the golf course, and then a game that they play that they enjoy for motives and goals that they find meaningful. And while that's true of the people who love golf, it's not true of me, and that's okay. So that's what makes the Tantric and Shaiva world very difficult to interact with, because the words are very broad. So very, very basically, Tantra, the word Tantra refers to a textural also, but textual and scriptural tradition. Also, forgive me, I've totally lost. I'm squeaky. Sorry, I'm a bit squeaky.
The adolescence.
I've been chanting a lot. We're all chanted out. We're enchanted. So out chanted. So when we say the word Tantra, like I should define my terms. When I say Tantra, usually when I use that word, I mean it in the sense that I'm referring to a scriptural tradition that contains both primary sources and secondary sources. And to be very clear, I regard many of these secondary sources to also be primary sources. So I'll get into that distinction in just a few moments. What is a primary source, what's a secondary source, and how do you distinguish whether a text in front of you is either a primary or secondary source? Because usually it's both. That's the interesting thing about the Tantras. Usually it's like a liminal space between a primary source and a secondary source. And you can even argue that our access to primary sources requires secondary sources, because usually when we get the text, either through oral transmission or through a literal physical copy or through a digital copy, the text, the Tantra, will be nested within or situated within a secondary source. You know, to acquire the primary source, usually I'll have to go to some exegetical material. And I'll get into some nuances in a bit. But for now, it's just the most important thing is to establish clearly what we mean by the word Tantra. And by the way, you'll see much of the flavor of this talk is first principles. You know, insofar as we're doing this puja, we're doing prana pratishtha, we're establishing this place, we're doing a lot of work to create the safeguards required for a truly spiritually nourishing environment, you know, that everyone feels safe in, that can be a representative of Thakur's vision of all paths being equally valid, leading to very different but equally valid goals that are all included in our concept of Shiva. But therefore, we must be very clear about what we mean by these terms. So think of a lot of these lectures kind of intellectual stapana puja, you know. Just be very clear about our terms so that our communication can be clear. And again, I'm going to speak on a philosophical level, an academic and historical level, an analytical level. So we're doing nyaya, we're doing some kind of intellectual, logical exercise, and so now we're engaging with our minds, as it were. It's a jnana yoga. But of course, every thought, every word is rooted ultimately in a kind of bhakti yoga, a love for this tradition. It's only when we love something that we desire to know something about it. And so our inquiry into it is in this humility that we know nothing of it and can know nothing of it. And yet, though my heart understands, my mind has not. Though but a dwarf, it would strive to make captive the moon. That was like Ram Prasad's sentiment in that beautiful Bengali song to Kali. He's saying that what Kali is cannot be understood. You can't really understand the word Shiva. You can't really understand the word Tantra. You can't really understand anything. All you can do is project onto a maximally and infinitely rich reality, your own framework, to make sense of your own life, to acquire goals that you yourself think are meaningful for you. And when you try to do that, everyone else around you is going to try to convince you that A, your goals are not meaningful, their goals are better than yours, so you should accept their goals and not yours. Like, for instance, a parent might wish you well, but what they want for you might not be what you actually want. They want you to get what you want, but they're not sure that what you want is good for you, because they think that what they want for you is good for you. And ultimately, they want what's good for you, so now there's a battle of wills. They think you should go and get X, but you want to go and get Y. And this is where we introduce two more words, Paratantra and Swatantra. So the word Tantra now has a different connotation. So when I say Paratantra, in Sanskrit I mean others Tantra, and when I say Swatantra, I mean one's own Tantra or self-Tantra. So when I use the word Tantra in this context, I'm using it in a different sense than when I generally use the word Tantra. I hope that's helpful. So I just want to define terms, almost like a glossary or a bibliography almost. So what do I mean by the word Tantra? Generally, most of the time, I'm referring to a scriptural and exegetical tradition that emerged in India around the 500-600 AD period and continues to exist until today. I'm referring to a living tradition that is constantly redefining its terms, reinterpreting its terms. I'm referring to a tradition that is, for the most part, conveyed in Sanskrit, which brings me to another very important point. The thing about Sanskrit words is that they're a bit slippery, and that's what makes them so rich. See, in many other languages, words just mean one thing. You can just like say, this is the word, and this word refers to this. And the English language is really beautiful in this way because it's quite, in one sense, simple. It's not easy to learn because words don't really sound as they're spelled. So the word like Though, like, how do you pronounce that? If you're learning English and you see those letters on a page, dog? You know, like, it's hard to, but you have to like kind of colloquially learn that it's though. See, the English grammar is kind of hard to learn because it's a prakrit, it's like a living language that changes all the time. Northern Europeans come and bring words like knife and anger, and now they're part of the English language. Or words like karma and mantra and guru are all part of the English language. Words tantra, mantra, guru, Buddha. Again, I'm not making fun of these things. They're words.
Yes.
You understand? Like this is not appropriation. It's like this is the way that a culture interacts with ideas, and they come up with their own words for it. So the word Buddha might be different from Buddha. The word mantra might be different from mantra. And certainly the word tantra is different from tantra, because we often use these words in different ways. Kundalini, chakras, these all mean different things to different people. And this isn't to invalidate anyone else's use of that word. It's just to be clear about what we mean when we use those words. You know? And that's maybe part of the confusion. Because we don't know what we're buying into, because often people aren't clear. And I don't think I've been as clear as I can be, because I've been presupposing a lot of things. So I thought, let's just do first principles today. Let's just like establish a few things. And since we're teaching mostly Tantra, in fact, almost exclusively Tantra, in the context of the Ramakrishna Parampara and the Shaiva tradition, it's like, let's maybe start with that. Let's start with the word Tantra, then let's start with the word Shaivism. And today, let's just argue for what our interpretation of that tradition looks like, in light of Sri Ramakrishna, as it were. That's my goal. Hopefully, you can hear me on the internet. I don't have any of my microphones or anything like that. It's just a computer with an iPhone charger, which is kind of sweet. And indie. What's that? Oh, thank you, Viranath. Thank you for checking. So, and I'm going to speak quite softly today, because the voice doesn't carry as it usually does. So, technical difficulties aside, let's just see where this takes us, and then we'll have a Q&A, and the Q&A is very important. Like right now, especially for those of you in the room, we have to be very clear about certain things, and therefore ask me questions. And I'll just finish the thing, and then we'll open for a Q&A, and then in that Q&A we'll go into a more like satsang style. Now I'll just like present the material, and then post the material, we'll go into satsang style. That's more important to me, because I've noticed I've presented material, and it's been fun and cool and all, but we're not giving enough time, I think, for satsang, because I'm not quite sure that how I meant certain things, how you heard certain things. And that gap I want to close. And that requires conversation, not you passively listening to me and me saying words that I think you will understand the way I mean, but like you talking to me and showing me where you're at with your understanding, which is equally valid, and then debating maybe where we can find common ground. So here's what I mean by the word Tantra. When I use it, generally, I use it to mean a specific scriptural, both primary and secondary, that emerged in India around 500 or 600 AD, and that continues to exist to this very day. And the texts that we're talking about have emerged at various points in history. And the cultural, historical context in which these texts appear do indeed affect the text. So it's not enough to have access to a Tantra. I think it's also important, just from an academic integrity point of view, to also consider the historical, political forces that were present in India at that time, which might have influenced that text. Even if it's a primary source. So this is where I step away from tradition a little bit, because I'm approaching it in a kind of modern academic sense, in which I'm willing to say that Tantras revealed by Shiva might have been revealed by a human being who is inspired by Shiva. Which means, exactly, a human being who experiences Shiva. And in one sense, it could be I am Shiva. According to one part of Tantra, Shivoham. Another part, you are Shiva, Shivotvam. But some experience of Shiva allows them to give us a teaching. So in that sense, they're a prophet. But the beauty of the Tantric tradition is that we don't put any emphasis on the human who reveals the teaching, because we don't actually think the human revealed the teaching. God revealed the teaching through the human, so why attribute it to the human? Why even call them a messenger? We don't even care. It's so beautiful, the Tantric tradition doesn't really even, it has such reverence for the Guru, but it has reverence for Gurutva, Guru Tattva. It has reverence for that knowledge that comes through a person, but without getting involved in some kind of weird personality, cult of charisma kind of thing. It's like, it's very difficult to do this in this country, where persons and brands become products. So when you want to study something, it's like, no, I'm a follower of this person. So in our community, we're not following a person, we're following a tradition. But that tradition is very diverse and very rich, so we personify it as this being called Shiva, which is, to some people, an actual being. And I feel that way about Shiva often. But also to other people, it's being in and of itself. So Shiva can be understood as personal or impersonal, with form or without form. We'll get into all of those details today, hopefully, Ma willing. But in what sense? It doesn't matter what we mean by Shiva. Generally, it just refers to that transcendent reality which we call divine or God, for lack of a better word, or the absolute, or the ground of reality. So many poetic ways of describing this thing, but we all more or less intuit that we mean the same thing. We're talking about that religious or mystical aspect that makes this a spiritual tradition. So that is the source of knowledge. That is what reveals to us everything that we know about this tradition. So how do I know how to do the tantras? Somebody taught me. who is teaching me. Maybe it was a person. A particular woman that I met in the smashan taught me this. A person said these mantras. But when you teach that, you'll probably say, oh, Kali taught them. And that person will probably also say it comes from Kali or something like that. So Kali, Shiva, whatever the deity might be, Manjushri or Narada even, doesn't have to be a deity. It could also be a Muni or a Rishi, like Hayagriva or even Indra. Like it could be anybody like that. But it's a divine being. And when the divine being reveals the Tantra, we attribute the Tantra to the divine being. So the Tantras are considered to be authored by Shiva. They are the revelation of Shiva. And this is historically the case because before they were the revelations of Manjushri or Narada, before Vaishnava and Vajrayana forms of Tantra emerged, the only Tantra likely available in the Indian subcontinent, or the Indic subcontinent, I should say, to be more precise, because you have to include places that would now be in Pakistan, places that are now in Bangladesh. So this is a modern academic way of saying, when I use the word India, I'm not actually referring to the political entity called India defined by state borders, because a lot of these traditions emerged in Pakistan, like some of the Kali Kula Krama traditions, Uttaramnaya, which these terms will all define in just a bit. Those traditions are found in valleys in Pakistan, like Swat Valley, for instance, that are not now in the political national state called India. And yet, at one time, they belonged to this region. And by the way, at that time, there was no India either. It wasn't until Swami Vivekananda, arguably, that Indians started to use the word Indian. Before that, I would say I'm a Malayali or I'm a Tamil. In fact, it was probably unlikely that a Tamil person would marry a Malayali person. So in one sense, I'm a mixed race kid.
No one understands that here.
Yeah, my mom has dark hair. My father has dark hair. Both of them are brown skin. But in one sense, they're from different cultural climates, right? And so India is almost like a continent, subcontinent, just like Africa is a continent, not a country. And it's important to say that because Africa is really diverse. So if you call Africa a country, you're flattening it. You know what I mean? You're saying that, everyone in Africa is the same, which is a statement of great cultural insensitivity and ignorance, because you're saying, if I met an Igbo person in Nigeria, I know everything there is to know about Africa. But that's very problematic because it excludes other people in Africa who are parts of very different language structures, religious structures, cultural structures. They see themselves in the world differently. The Igbo people have a certain relationship to time and space that might be unique to the Igbo people. So you can't call it African.
You couldn't even call it Nigerian.
You couldn't even call it Nigerian because there are different tribes in Nigeria. So a big part of the Rwandan genocide is like the attempt of colonial powers to divide up Africa along imaginary and arbitrary lines. They don't actually mean anything to the living people in that place. So they're a group, the Hutus and the Tutsis, and they have their place, right? But then when people force them to live together because of these imagined state or border lines drawn up, in a boardroom somewhere in France or in London. And again, I'm not knocking anything. They were doing their best, maybe. I don't know. But here's the problem. It's like it forces concepts that flatten, that silence, and that exclude. Because we're forcing people into a narrative, both geographically and intellectually. So when I say India, it's also a challenging word. You see, because when I say India, am I referring to the political entity, the nation state of India, which is fairly modern, actually? No, absolutely not. Because there was a time when you would consider yourself maybe a citizen in the kingdom of Kalinga, in Orisha. And that's very different from being a citizen in like the kingdom of the Kola dynasty, for instance, or the Chola dynasty. That's a very different place. And therefore, there are different cultural forces that are acting upon the authors who are producing the tantras, which are attributed to Shiva. Do you see how this is a modern way of reading Tantra? Because I'm willing to bring in historical and cultural context and allow those to shape the way I interact with tantras, which we would otherwise, in a more traditional context, just accept religiously and axiomatically as true. Do you know what I mean? If it's in the tantras, it must be true. That's actually a very beautiful way to approach it. It's a devotional way to approach things. You're saying Shiva is God. I believe because I was told by my tradition that Shiva revealed the tantras. After all, the opening line in the tantra is probably something like Parvati Uvacha or Shiva Uvacha or Bhairava Uvacha. Oh, Shiva said this. And if Shiva said this, I don't have to ask any questions. I'm sorry, but I like to ask questions. Not because I don't have faith in Shiva, but because I believe in the Christian tradition of faith-seeking understanding. It's a beautiful thing. In Christianity, faith is the most important thing. Arguably, that's the emphasis in Christianity. But notice, the moment I say that, a Christian might say, no, I don't think faith is the most important thing. Because what I just did there was flatten Christianity, you see? I used the word Christianity, but I'm talking about something very specific. But now, by using that word, I'm speaking for all Christians, which I cannot do because I'm not a Christian. Do you see how even in that moment, I have to back up and be like, let's be careful, let's be delicate, because that was insensitive, that was violent, that was aggressive, that was me making a claim on behalf of a tradition that I did not grow up in, that I'm not a part of, that is actually a valid and beautiful tradition, that I'm only interpreting based on what I've heard of that tradition by people who maybe weren't as careful with the way that they use their words. Not to discredit them, of course, we only have so much time, but I have time. And so I'm going to take my time. And we're going to slowly go. That's kind of the project right now. Slowly and slowly we'll build, brick by brick, word by word. And so let's just take this word, Tantra. What does it mean? So when it comes to Christianity, you might say the general flavor you get of Christianity is that it's a devotional tradition. It's devotion to Christ, devotion to God, and it's all maybe prayer-oriented, however you can interpret God in a very different way. Meister Eckhart will interpret God much more like Advaita Vedanta's Brahman, Godhead, for instance. And there are jnana traditions, philosophical inquiry traditions within Christianity, maybe even represented by dualistic, theistic authors like St. Anselm or St. Augustine. Actually, Augustine is very important to me because St. Augustine is demonstrating how within Christianity you could have problems with your faith but still participate in that faith. That's a beautiful thing. It's like, oh, I don't believe the Tantras were written by Shiva. Actually, but that doesn't mean I can't benefit from the Tantras. Or I'm benefiting from the Tantras. But why should I accept that it was revealed by Shiva? Well, maybe there's deep poetic and emotional value to that. Maybe when you feel in your heart that this is God speaking to you, it brings a certain dimension to your practice. That's why it's one thing to buy the Bhagavad Gita off of like an online store and then get it delivered to your house and then read through it like it's another book cover to cover. I hear people say, I read the Gita. Sure, but it's not a thing that you read cover to cover. You can't read the Gita. The Gita is a living transmission from God. And so it's important that when you read the line, Shri Krishna Vacha, you think to yourself, oh my God, God is speaking. Like God is speaking to Sri Arjuna. Of course, I'm eavesdropping. It's another very important point that I want to make about Tantra, because just because Ramakrishna is saying something doesn't mean he's saying it to you. Or just because Shiva is saying something, he's saying it to his wife in the context of pillow talk after an intimate moment. Like you're just creepily there. In the cup chair in the hotel room. Like a lot of Tantra is just that. You're like listening in on a conversation that a quote-unquote husband and wife are having about things that might not even have anything to do with you.
Which brings up like a higher degree of reality to it than we give it credit for when we're like, oh yeah, God said.
Exactly.
Sure they did. It's like, no, what we really believe is that some person wrote it.
Yeah.
And like attributed it to that person.
Exactly. And so it's like, we don't know what the source of the Tantra is, but it makes sense also to like consider the internal, maybe I should say metaphorical, but maybe I should also say, maybe metaphorical context. It's Shiva talking to Parvati, and in the Bhagavad Gita, it's Krishna talking to Sri Arjuna. Right? So in that conversation, it's going to say, Sri Krishna said this, Arjuna said that. Now it might be meaningful for you to think of Sri Krishna as God. And if you think Sri Krishna is the incarnation of God, then when God says something, whether it's to you or to someone else, you take an interest in it. But just because it's interesting doesn't mean it's for you. But just because it's not for you doesn't mean it's not worth listening to. And that's the beauty and complexity of the Bhagavad Gita. So you can't say, oh, the Bhagavad Gita says this. Well, Sri Krishna said something in Sanskrit, but you probably don't know Sanskrit. So what do you know about what he said? And first of all, we don't even know if he said it in Sanskrit. Probably didn't. And did he even say it in history? See, all these complexities arise. And it's because we're not willing to look at those complexities that we just want to have everything be simple and cut and dried and direct, that we get into trouble later on. So taking a step back, we have to remember that it might be valuable to some people to think that Shiva is God. And I grew up in a community where that was true. Like our theistic idea is that there is God, and Shiva is that God. And that God spoke to us, as it were, indirectly by saying things to his wife. And now my grandfather is handing me a book in either Tamil or in Sanskrit in which that conversation is recorded. And from a religious and maybe emotional point of view, cultural point of view, it is deeply valuable to me that Shiva said these things, that Shiva is teaching these things. And I should point out, in my childhood, I went to an ashram when I was 14 in Puttaparthi in Bangalore. I love Hyderabad food, the spiciest. And so I was just there eating really good biryani, enjoying my time. And this was when I was 14, maybe 13 or 14 or whatever. And I was starting to like think for myself in a way. Like I was interested in my own spiritual life. Because before this, I'm exposed to temple culture, and I'm like in that world, but it's not really my world. I'm just there because my grandparents would bring me. But I wouldn't really want to be there. I would rather be watching TV or playing video games or something like it's not my world, but it was a world that I was in. But when I was like 12, 13, 14, it started to become interesting to me, but not necessarily like because of the context I was in. So I was like reading lots of different stuff. And in that ashram at Puttaparthi, I was very excited because it was this bookstore. And for the first time, I started like wanting to read my own books. as opposed to the religious books that were my own choices, as opposed to the ones that were available in the house. So I just picked up the Gita because I was under the impression that that's the book of Hinduism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if Christianity has a book, if Islam has a book, shouldn't Hinduism have a book? This I have to push back on. You cannot read Hinduism the way you read your Abrahamic religions. Because Abrahamic religions, a big part of it is an imperial project. And using one book is a good way to smack other people with it and get them to join your kingdom at the threat of sword point. You say, your book is not as good as my book, and we'll go to war, and if I win, you'll see my book is superior. And even that book is a highly edited political project. Like say King James, he's reinterpreting the word pharmakia in the Greek, in the the New Testament. No, sorry, in the Old Testament, the word is pharmakia in the Greek. But King James is reading that Leviticus, is it Exodus? Yeah, he's reading that line in Exodus as witch. So the word witch is unique to that cultural context. Like it's a medieval kind of English or Western European kind of concept, right? The word pharmakia might mean something like, I don't know, it could mean different. I don't know what the Greeks meant by the word pharmakia. It could mean a drug dealer. It could mean someone that deals in herbs, or a medicine person, or a shaman, or a sorcerer. Like these words are all kind of, we don't know what, seriously, we weren't there. We don't know what the Greeks in the Levant, or in various parts of the Greek Alexandrian world, we don't know what 2nd century AD Alexandrians who were speaking Greek,
Is that unless you study it?
Yeah, exactly. All we have access to is the text in Greek. And most people don't speak Greek. And even if they did, they don't really have access to any other academic materials that would give them an insight as to what life was actually like in 2nd century AD. And we're always going to have this problem, is to map the territory. Even if I have a good intellectual and academic understanding of what it was like in 2nd century AD, enough to even get a PhD in history on it, the fact is I wasn't there maybe. And so I don't really know, I should always introduce this humility, I don't really know what they meant by the word pharmakia. But it's open to interpretation, and it's a historical fact that King James was interested in interpreting that. I mean, to his credit, I don't think it's wrong that he did this. Of course he has to do this. We're all doing this all the time. We are interpreting. And all I am is an interpreter. And so I'm presenting to you now my interpretations. And so King James is doing the same thing. We can't blame him, but you also can't deny that there was maybe a political agenda there. And maybe not. Maybe that's our projection. I don't know. Again, I want to introduce some humility here even. I don't know why King James did it. I don't even know that he did do it. But the historical narrative that I've heard is this, that King James reads the word pharmakia in Greek, has it translated into witch. And when the Bible is now presented to people in the common tongue, what they're reading is, suffer not a witch to live. Which has very real consequences. Because now the woman next door who cured your child's cold is somebody that you should be afraid of because she has power. And if she has power to cure your child, she also has power to kill your child. And that's not a power we can allow a person to have, especially if I get into an altercation with them. So a big part of the Salem witch trials was not actually about witchcraft. It was people who had a problem with other people who used that Inquisition logic to get them exiled and killed. You know, it's very easy to get rid of people you don't like when there are words like this, suffer not a witch to live. You know, so the witch hunt, the proverbial witch hunt, exists now. And it's because we're interpreting words in ways that are sometimes meaningfully with an agenda or inadvertently with an agenda, which maybe is even worse. Who's to say what's better or worse? It just is, right? So the implication of King James reading the word pharmakia, which could have just meant somebody who sold substances. It could have meant drug dealer. Please don't try to reach me through my dealer. He won't pick up the phone. Yeah. Love that guy. Now, very Agori coded. So it's very important. We don't know what he meant, the word pharmakia. It could have meant drug dealer, it could have meant a medicine person, a shaman. But it's very important to note that when it was changed to witch, it had very serious consequences that weren't just felt in Europe, they were felt here, in Boston. And by the way, when I was in Salem and I was looking at some of these, the first time I'd gone to Salem, I was interested, like, why these people, what do they do that marks them out as witches? Because I'm interested in witches. So like, what were they practicing? What was their tantra, as it were? And I noticed a lot of them were just women who were like single. Like one of them, for instance, she was just a woman who had many lovers and loved art and was a kind of a bohemian type, and that was one of the witches. So often it's like when people express themselves, or they express themselves differently from how other people express themselves, or when they don't do what a woman ought to do in that society, when they speak out, when they're told to be quiet or whatever, witch. And so Margaret Atwood has good kind of work on this, right? Like spelling. We don't want women to read because if they read, then they will know how to spell. And if they know how to spell, then they're witches because witches cast spells. And this brings us into a very beautiful discussion about word and magic. Like abracadabra, and then the conversations around like, how words affect magic. Like the whole Harry Potter kind of fictional world where you use a word in order to create change in the world. But what is the quality of that word? Is it the sound? Because if you say it's Leviosa, you get an effect. But if you say it differently, you don't get that effect. And so Ronald Weasley is always fucking shit up because he's not actually taking the time to pronounce things correctly. Whereas somebody who does pronounce things correctly might be so good at it that they might not even need to say it out loud. Because the Harry Potter world even introduces this idea of like manasa, like there's like mental spells that Harry has to learn, but it's hard to do. You see, it's a very interesting thing because in culture, in culture, I mean in like popular culture, these ideas are all available. And so when we say women learning to read, women learning to spell, that gives them kind of power. Knowledge is power, learning is power, speech is power. We take that very seriously. Therefore, learn Sanskrit, read, be smart, be intellectually refined. That's very important in this community because it's important to Shaivas. A lot of us were Nyayikas first. I teach debate in a middle school. I would never put religion in front of a child because until I know that their mind is like a sword, why would I give them religion? It's like giving a sword to someone who doesn't know how to wield it. They'll fall upon it. They don't know how to think. And they're not careful, so they quickly jump to conclusions. So that's what I'm realizing. It's like there's a lot of intellectual refinement that is required to be able to engage with texts that are very intellectually refined, that belong in a tradition that are actually very sophisticated and nuanced and complex. So we can't just call it Africa and expect that the whole thing is just the Igbo people. Because it's not. There are many other tribes there. So when it comes to the word like witch, again, that's a word that's been reclaimed. So now it's kind of cool, right? It's like the word bitch is used to be pejorative towards women. You're saying dogs are bad. I don't know why. We love dogs in this tradition. But in India also, dogs are vermin kind of things. It's very transgressive for us to love dogs. We're loving vermins and transgressive. But in India and maybe many parts of the world, a dog is considered lesser than a human. That's certainly changed a lot these days. But back then, you say like if you call someone a dog, you're like saying you want to demean them. You want to drop them a level in the hierarchy which you've set up in terms of what beings are better or worse than others. So you're saying this woman is not even a person, not a human. She's an animal, a dog. No better than a dog. We call it bitch, and like that word is weaponized against women. It's a very painful and aggressive thing to say. So we shouldn't say it. Except now it can be used in a different context. A girl might say to her girlfriend, "Hey bitch, let's go do this." Or you're a boss bitch or something like that. It's like a reclamation. That word means something else now. And now, so much so that even if you aren't a woman, if you don't identify as a woman, you can be like, "Fuck yeah, bitch," or "Let's get it." There's a way to use the word without actually meaning any violence or aggression towards women. It's like the word has changed its context. And so like in the African American community, reclaiming words is very important because it takes that word away from those who would use it against them, as it were. It's a very tantric left-hand kind of thing. It's like what things could be an obstacle can become a friend. Instead of rejecting something, you just accept it, but you change the context in which you use it. The deep teaching here. Do you see how it's all related? The way that you would reclaim words is what we do in Vamachara. We reclaim all the problems in life and divinize them. The way you would reclaim a word which was otherwise used to oppress you. You were under addictive, under oppressive, tyrannical experiences. Not anymore. Now the very power under which I was subjugated is the power by which I subjugate, to use a more sorcerer language there. It's like, make your enemies your friends. And words that are used against you should not be rejected because then they're still having power over you. But when they're accepted, when they're loved, when they're understood, when you become them, when they become you, then they're your Shakti. In fact, you become devoted to them, those in a new way, because seeing their... Anyway, I'll start digressing if I get into this. It's exciting. This stuff is really exciting to me. But all I want to say is that a word is important, its meaning is important, and it can mean very different things. So even in the English language, you have to remember, it can be complex what the word witch means and what it meant to different people at different times. And it's always up for interpretation. You can always define what the word witch means. Now you could say like, the people are saying there's nature witch, or there's like different kinds of senses in which you use the word witch, and it can almost imply like a term of feminine empowerment. It's good to be a witch, right? It means you have access to nature. It's very interesting. I was doing a wedding in a particular part of America that I hadn't been to before. It's very interesting because I was talking to these people who identify as Christian, but they still carry out their folk practices. And that's the thing about Christianity. Like in Ireland, Christianity in Ireland is still quite inclusive of Gaelic folk practices that have now just taken on an overtly Christian flavor, but still maintain more or less the same Gaelic folk practice they've been doing since the nation was called Caledonia, and they worship Kali in the form of Kailiak, and the person who's named Kelly was actually a priest of Kailiak. Since then, those practices are still maintained, except now, instead of using the deities that you know, instead of calling her Tanatsan, you might call her the Lady of Guadalupe. But it's the same deity, arguably, within the Christian context. And you know, in that story, to that saint, the deity Tanatsan, arguably, who was worshipped in that place as Tanatsan, is now appearing as Guadalupe. Same energy by a different name, arguably. And you might deny that. You might say, no, it's colonization. They should have worshipped as Tanatsan because the worship of Tanatsan involves things like they would sacrifice a white dove. I saw it was so beautiful. I'd never seen this kind of bali. But I was watching someone worship, I think it was Quatlikue, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. But the shaman or the practitioner, like he did the bali of the white dove on top of the statue. And it was beautiful because in the blood just like poured down the statue. It was very different. Their Bali tradition is very different from the Jewish Bali tradition. Because a big part of Judaism is animal sacrifice, but it's done differently from the Quatlikue tradition. Now, when you worship Lady of Guadalupe, you're not sacrificing white doves to her. So somebody in the Tanatsan tradition might have a problem with that. They might say, this is colonization. You've come and you've reinterpreted our traditions. I'm saying that doesn't have to be true. It's just adapting. Like now, instead of saying Tanatsan, which might not be available to you because of the new cultural context, you say the Lady of Guadalupe. But arguably, it's the same practice maintained under a different name with some minor difference. That's what happens in Ireland. It's a very Yoruba type practice. A lot of them use Christian concepts, but almost as a smokescreen for practices that survive, even in the context of Christian colonization and acquisition. It's a beautiful thing. So, coming back to this point, actually, I went on a digression, I forgot. The word witch, like, you could say, like, in the Gaelic context, you're doing herb practices or something. Oh, I remember now. And, like, you're using this herb for this thing, or you're burying a statue of a saint upside down in order to sell a house, something like that, right? And they're all, like, okay to do. But it's interesting. I was in a place like this where there was an American community. Many of them, I think, were Celtic, or they had some roots in northern or something, northern Europe, probably, like Western Northern Europe. And so I'm talking to them, and somebody's telling me about their practice. And just I'm like, wow, so you're a witch. But I thought that was cool to say, because I thought that would mean that she would feel empowered. Mm-hmm. And she got kind of offended. She's like, no, I'm a herbalist. She didn't like the term witch. I was like, interesting. Because that word in her community might be used pejoratively to mean someone who uses this science, this vidya, for bad things, dark things, getting rid of someone's husband, or like killing this person, or making this person sick, or it's a misuse of power. The word witch implies that. But the word herbalist might imply the very same practices, except directed towards outcomes that are socially more acceptable, or more noble, or egalitarian. It's an interesting thing. That's what I learned in this country, the nuances of the word witch. So this is true of the English language. The point I'm making, the broader point I'm making is that, like, if this is true of the English language, then words can mean different things. Imagine how true this must be of the Sanskrit language. So now let me talk a little bit about Sanskrit, because it's the medium in which so much Tantra is conveyed. And even when Tantras are presented in, like, say, Granthi script, or Tamil script, or Sarada script, they might still be in Sanskrit. And there's an important, like, Tamil and Bengali Tantric tradition that we should engage with also. But I can't speak from Bengali texts because I don't read them. I can speak from some Tamil texts, but I would prefer to speak from Sanskrit text. Why? Because there's a certain universality to Sanskrit, I think. But that doesn't mean I'm going to use Devanagari. Do you know what I mean? Like, Devanagari is specific to a particular region in India. So if you think Sanskrit looks like what it looks like in the script, again, you're misunderstanding it. That's according to one region in India. You know, Devanagari, or like the Hindi script, the Devanagari script, is one of many scripts in which Sanskrit is presented. You know, in Kashmir, now they might use Devanagari. That's become very popular and standard. They use Sarada script. So their Om would be different. You see? And so the orthographic or morphological points that the tradition makes will actually vary based on the cultural context, the kind of scripts they're using. And the kinds of scripts that they're using is also a feature of, like, geography. Because in South India, your thing is going to be a bit more cursive. Because of the banana leaves. But in North India, things are a bit more straight, as Sonu was teaching me. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? Like, we just assume that, like everybody is the same and that everybody lives like us. But there are weather changes that cause certain scripts to be different from other scripts. So Sanskrit is not a written thing, it's a spoken thing. It's not even a spoken thing. We argue very deep mystical statements about Sanskrit. Like, we mystify this language up the wazoo. We have faith in Sanskrit the way we have faith in God. But we don't have faith on letters on a page, because that's flattening. That, like, makes things defined. And Sanskrit, if anything, it's open, it's fluid, it's like, it refers to realities that are so hard to, like, intellectually even understand. I would even argue Sanskrit is the highest refinement of the intellect, which sounds like a somewhat elitist point to make, because the study and dissemination of Sanskrit knowledge has been so controlled, but not anymore. Anybody who sincerely wanted to learn could, and it's your responsibility too. Because unless you learn Sanskrit, why are you interacting with the Sanskrit tradition whose text you have not read for yourself? Otherwise, you're always going to be at the mercy of some guy. And that's why I love texts. Because texts refer to lots of people, refer to a nation, refer to historical context. And that's why I like to bring these in to show you that given the complexity, you have a certain leeway. Who can say this is what the Tantra says? Right? Like this is what the word pharmakia means. Nobody can say that. So you have to interpret it. But how will you interpret it if you don't even have access to it? And even if it's in front of you, how will you interpret it if you don't know what the words say? If you don't know what they mean? And if you're not willing to engage with the various meanings that the word could have?
It comes through through the mantra, like when you sit there and chant it.
Yeah.
You get the pronunciation.
That's the thing.
Just like that, it comes through the understanding too.
Yeah, so the intuiting into the meaning of the word is a very high function of the mind. We call it buddhi. And by buddhi, we don't just mean analytical, logical mind. We mean this. How when you chant a mantra over and over and over again, you come to understand its meaning in a slightly more rounded way, less of a flat way. The mind says, oh, this is what it is, it's X. This word means X, and it means X only. But when you do a mantra, you realize, oh my God, the bijas mean different things. Like there's so much nuance, and a single bija mantra can contain in that seed an entire forest. And when you chant the mantra again and again, you intuit into that fact, without being told. Paratantra versus Swatantra. I'm going to come back to that distinction. That distinction is so important to me. I'll get into it in a bit. But the reason why you can't just take things literally is because we don't even have access to the literature. You see what I mean? So our first task is this, Sanskrit education. That's why Bhairavananda and what he's doing in the community is so important. You must learn Sanskrit. You must. You must. You cannot live and die for a book that you have not read in its original tongue. And that's the thing about Christianity. The reason it becomes so complicated is because there's a book and we don't really know what goes in the book. So we get together in a council, as I understand it, the Nicene Creed, we decide, okay, this is canon and this is not canon. It's interesting because there are many people who consider themselves Christians whose books were not included in the Christian book.
And then there's different translations.
Yes, exactly.
It's a big game of telephone.
Yes, okay, exactly.
Which telephone always fails because by the time you get to the end person, it's a completely different message.
True, and the reason why it's a game of telephone is because there are a few forces at work here, right? Like I don't think the people in Nicene Creed necessarily needed to exclude, but they needed to kind of define. And so in defining, they would say things like, okay, maybe the thunder perfect mind is not included in what's canon. And so certain communities, we call them Gnostic communities now. And again, that word has changed a lot because now when we use the word Gnostic, in the New Age world, it almost implies the non-dual teachings of Jesus. Never mind the fact that many of the texts, like War Scrolls, Q14, many of the texts within the Nag Hammadi tradition are not only dualistic, but militarily dualistic. Like the Gnostic tradition in the modern context might be like, draconian, like they're evil people. It's like there's a bad guy, God, demiurge, and he's like this, like kind of like modern conspiracy theories. A lot of them do have a Gnostic flavor or Zoroastrian dualism. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all of that now. The point to say, though, just to stay on track here, is the words in English. Oh, sorry. Sanskrit. So the thing about Sanskrit, it's very important to learn Sanskrit because in the Christian world, you say there's a book, but it's like you said, a broken game of telephone here because it's like. What books are included in the Bible? The Bible is a book, which is a conglomeration of other books. But then which books get selected? And a group of people sit down to decide. And that happened for the Quran as well. So the Quran and the Bible are both expressions of an imperial and colonial project to define a nation state, as it were, and then to inflict that nation state upon others, for better or for worse. So the idea of a book is very problematic because within that book is a flattening of cultures. Say, you guys are not part of this book. Why? Because a group of people at some board of directors table decided so. It takes. If you say if you want to live and die for the Bible, you have to first consider that the Bible is the revelation of God, but it was edited by humans, as it were. So the relationship between the divine authorship and human authorship becomes a central issue in Tantra, which is what I'm trying to address now before we even define the word Tantra. I just want to define some textual and scriptural complexities that are worth looking at. Okay, who's calling now? Let's decline that. All right, cool. So, coming back to this point, it's important to learn Sanskrit. And that's why Swami Vivekananda, he really worked really hard to learn Sanskrit. Because it's not something that is necessarily taught in India. Very few people in India know Sanskrit. And that's unfortunate because it means they can't access their texts. And so they're always at the mercy of what their priests tell them about those texts. And that's why priests have acquired way too much power in India. Because as Sri Ramakrishna used to joke, when a priest performs his puja, sometimes he just flips through the pages, but you won't know whether he's omitting something he shouldn't be omitting. So he just do whatever he wants. Some of the Tamil temples, they'll just chant Shiva Puranam all day. Like, Om Namah Shivaya, Valganathan, Dal, Valgame, Pulam, Ninjal, Niga, that's great and all, right? But sometimes they just do it to make you feel like they're like saying something holy. And they are. But it's like it gives them a lot of room to interpret things how they want and then tell you without you having any checks and balances. So in our community, I'm trying to do a few things to keep us safe. One, I'm trying to encourage Sanskrit education so that you have the tools to interact with the primary sources and secondary sources in which those primary sources are nested. That's the first thing. You need to learn Sanskrit because without that, you won't be able to access. To discern. You need to learn Sanskrit first because you won't be able to discern without having at least a basic understanding of Sanskrit grammar and vocabulary. Secondly, you need to have access to the text. So having a directory of what texts say what and which ones might be interesting to you, and mostly are going to be in Sanskrit. Then you need to be able to interact with them, right? These things will keep you safe. Do you need to do this? No. But if you don't do this, then it's okay, but you have to remember that you're giving up some of your power. Do you know what I mean? You're like allowing someone else to tell you what to do. And that's the last thing I want to do. I want to empower you to decide what to do. And so all I can do is give you tools. I can only provide a Promethean fire. What you do with that fire is up to you. That's the thing. I'm not going to tell you how to use that fire because that's not what Shiva does. He just gives mantras. When Shiva initiates, and only Shiva can initiate, no human can initiate, as I'm going to argue for. Because again, this whole conversation about teaching, initiation, is it Shiva or is it a person? This is actually the conversation we're having because it comes down to the text. The text is attributed to Shiva, but what does that mean? The Bible is attributed to God, but what does that mean? And why is it that there are a group of men in Constantine's Rome deciding what God said or didn't say? God's PR team. Like Nagarjuna is Buddha's like PR guy. Like, is God the kind of being that needs a PR team? And if so, what's the link between the PR team and God? What's the link between the prophet and the message? This is a very important thing, very important to consider because the tantric world is based on the authority of texts, which are based on the authority of a deity called Shiva, especially in the Shaiva world. Okay, so we have to ask the question, what is Shiva? And to ask what is Shiva will necessarily mean understanding something about what is Tantra. They're related. What is Tantra and what is Shiva? Although Tantra is not necessarily Shaiva. Like I said earlier, there's Buddhist Tantra, there's Vaishnava Tantra, there's Jain Tantra. I might even go so far as to suggest there's Islamic Tantra, if you study the works of like Hazrat Inayat Khan or whatever. So what I'm presenting is very intellectual, but it's one thing of many things in our tradition, but it's an important thing. So build the mind, study, read every day. That's a very important thing, right? Like reading a lot is important because you're basing your entire life on text. So you should regularly go to the text. And they're not all the time written. Most of them are sung and chanted and spoken. The way that we interact with the tantric world in India and all over the world is very rarely through reading, it's through hearing. It's through chanting. So when I say interact with the text, I don't necessarily mean like sit in a corner and read a book, although that's very good to do. But also hear it, chant it. But none of that will mean as much as it could mean if we don't know basic Sanskrit. Right? So Swami Vivekananda, he made it a point to learn it himself. And he worked really hard to do it. He worked really hard to learn Sanskrit grammar because Sanskrit grammar is unlike English grammar. It's in one sense infinitely more complex, but in another sense also easier because it's a bit more like set. Because see, in English, the word Thugh doesn't sound like that. But in Sanskrit, the words sound like they're spelled. Yeah. That's the beauty. Whatever script that you're in, oftentimes the word will sound like that. Like in Tamil, the word Bhairava, it'll be a Bhairava. Or we don't have like aspirated sounds, So we don't say ta as opposed to tha. So some differences like that might come. So even considering that, if you look at Devanagari, just Devanagari, the words do sound like they're spelled, which is quite helpful actually. So learning to read Sanskrit is maybe a little easier than learning to read English in one sense. But in another sense, Sanskrit is much harder than English because it's not. I'll step back. English is most of the time used to refer to things in the material and physical world. We can say, and this is, again, it could be a flattening statement, be careful. But English is often the language that we use to transact. And so it's often been said, I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying it's often been said of English that it's a trader's language. Languages like Bahasa Malaysia or English, or even to some extent French, these are lingua francas. And lingua franca means a language that is easy to learn in terms of grammar, that is inclusive of various words of various cultures because it's used by various different peoples, and it's a word that typically refers to things in the external world. That's the thing about lingua franca. Lingua franca is a language that has trade connotations. It became important to have a lingua franca when Alexander had an empire that stretched across different cultural contexts. You needed Greek to be the lingua franca that brought everyone together under the Macedonian Empire. That's an important thing. This is not a bad thing that everyone is speaking the same language because it was during this time that you had such a great exchange of ideas. So colonization, tyranny, oppression, these are historical facts, but they're not entirely bad. Good things have come about as a result of Alexander's empire, which could have been founded on violence and political intrigue, on some Machiavellian sense of acquiring power. Like, all of that is still true, but you cannot deny that human civilization benefited a lot from talking to one another. But we couldn't talk to one another if we're all speaking different languages, so we had to decide on a language to use together. And it was convenient to just use the language of the colonial power at the time. And at one time, that was Greek. And so much of what we consider Christianity is in Greek, actually. It was in Alexandria that Neoplatonic ideas, that like early Christian theology and philosophy was formed arguably in the 2nd century AD, using the cult of Jesus as its central figure. So the cultic movement, I don't use the word cult in any pejorative sense here, but the cultic movement around this deity, solar deity Jesus, like this, like a Zeus Jesus figure moving through 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples, his son moves through 12 houses, like this whole solar, like death, rebirth, Osiris kind of tradition. There's a tradition. Mithra, Osiris, you can clearly see the precedence for the Jesus religion. And you can see that it exists within a Jewish context. Jesus is a rabbi within a Jewish context that speaks to other Jewish people in the context of their tradition. That's why American Christianity becomes really weird, because it's Gentiles doing a Jewish tradition. Obviously, they're gonna right, like what? It's not the same context, but that's okay, because Saint Paul arguably is doing something really interesting. He never met Jesus, by the way. He's had a mystical experience of Jesus, and he's using Greek, writing letters in Greek, right, to Greek cities to tell them of Jesus. So what Saint Paul is establishing is a Christianity that might be very different from the Christianity that was practiced in, say, Rome or in Alexandria or in the Levant, where it was born. So without knowing something of the Levant, without being Jewish, can you be Christian? It's a very good question. St. Paul says, absolutely you can be Christian. It's in the Bible. There's one nation, it's okay. It's okay that you're not Jewish. But in one sense, it's also not okay, because so many things that the Christ says come from a Jewish context. For example, Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani, what does he mean by that? Is he despairing? Like when he's on the cross, he's saying, Father, thou hast forsaken me. Like he's angry at God. Is that what it means? Well, only if you didn't know that in the Jewish tradition there are psalms, and those psalms are things that you sing to God, right? And a lot of them, they carry this flavor of a diaspora people struggling to articulate itself, and often it's like plaintive, right? There's like a flavor of the psalms, and it's in a psalm that this line appears. So it changes the whole context of that story. Is Jesus complaining against God, which is a very theologically interesting thing to consider, that God's son is mad at dad. He's mad at himself. Like, what does that even mean? It's wonderful to think about that. But if you're not Jewish, you might miss this very important fact. It's a psalm. So it's possible that he isn't at all complaining to God. He's just passing the time singing a song that his people would have sung in order to pass the time. Do you know what I mean? When we are hungry and cold and we have nowhere to go, we just have our songs. And the Christ is hungry and cold and dying, and he's a Jewish man.
And the song in question was devotional, praise.
Yes, exactly. If you don't know that, if you're not Jewish, you don't understand that complaining to God is praising God in one sense. He might not be saying, fuck you, Dad. He might just be a Jewish guy in a Jewish context singing a beautiful song in a difficult time. Do you know what I mean? But if you aren't Jewish, you won't understand that. And so can you be Christian without being Jewish? I think in one sense it's irresponsible. I'm happy to say that because I see this happening with our traditions a lot too. Because there's so many things you don't understand by not being part of that world. And so Christ is part of a particular world that we at least have an intellectual responsibility to understand before we start making claims based on that world. So a lot of people ride to war in the name of a Christian God who they heard about in a book that they've never even once read in its original language, much less understood the cultural context in which it was spoken. How crazy. It's no wonder we make a mess of things. And it's no wonder we can't communicate with one another, because we can't even agree on the words that we're using and what they mean, because they mean different things to different people. So coming back to English, if you consider English a lingua franca, it's, I think, a very important fact that even then it's difficult to define what a word means. Because the whole purpose of English is to be able to conveniently refer to things in the outside world in order to be able to transact in a trade or imperial context. That's what Greek is for. That's why so much of the Bible is in Greek, because it's for a globalized world under a Greek context. So although Aramaic and Hebrew would be a much more appropriate way to learn the Bible, the fact is the Bible was a lot of it disseminated in Greek, and in no small part because of St. Paul. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of Christianity are you talking about when you use the word Christian? St. Paul's Christianity? Are you talking about Constantine's Roman Christianity, or an Orthodox Christianity? And if Orthodox, is it Armenian or Greek? Because those nuances matter. Is it the Igbo people you're talking about when you say the word Africa? And if Africa means Igbo, what about Hutsis and Hutus and the Tutsis? And if you're not willing to consider that, then you'll draw a line on the map that forces two people together that cannot be together, and they will fight and kill each other, like in the case of the Rwanda genocide. If you cannot be specific, then some woman in Boston is going to be killed because she likes to go out late at night, because she likes to drink. It's very important. People die because we don't take the time to think.
Yeah, no, and having the ability to have the discernment that intellect delivers, it's like kind of like when I was interested in martial arts, like for me, I was, and during the time when I was learning it, I was very angry.
Yeah.
But martial arts, I felt like when I was learning it, it felt like it took my anger and made it a sword. It made it something
Exactly.
directed. It took all
That's
of
a good
this
point.
and just refined it and allowed me to point it.
Yes, that's a good point. There are religious traditions that speak out against language, against intellect, against words, because they say it's a kind of thing that traps you. It's like a sword. But what you're saying is that you can use a sword.
Yeah.
So that's what we're saying. The mind is a sword.
Learn how to use this.
We have to sharpen it. Many people don't want you to sharpen the sword because they're afraid of you having a sword. My first responsibility in this community, my first goal in this community, is for our swords to be as sharp as possible. Swami Vivekananda, they said about him that he was a person who walked around with a sword drawn. We are aggressive, but we like fight with our hands. I want to fence, not knife fight. So I mean, if we're going to debate with one another, if we're going to argue with one another, don't pull out your dagger and try to stab me in an alley. It could be fun. That could be sexy too. But I prefer fencing. In other words, I prefer engaging on a very sophisticated and refined intellectual level, which means that we, all of us, owe it to each other to refine our intellects.
Cut the fat.
Yes, learn Sanskrit, read Sanskrit text, use Sanskrit terms, debate what those terms mean, which is what Viranatha and I were doing there when we were using the words Sahita, Cha, and compounds. Will they, these are conversations you can only have if you have some sense for what the word Cha, Sahita, and maybe a compound would be. It's like Sanskrit, and also, once you learn Sanskrit grammar, it gives you an insight to these tantric traditions, because a lot of them are making points based off of morphology or orthography, which is how words look. So if something looks a certain way on a piece of paper, you can make philosophical claims about it. Like the word Om, for instance, if you draw Om in Devanagari, you can say this represents waking, dreaming, deep sleep. You can link the symbol Om to the teaching in the Mandukya Upanishad, the way you would link a Kali Yantra, which is a symbol, to a galaxy of philosophical ideas, like we did last night when we chanted the Kali Katagamala Stotram, right? You see, the symbol is important because it's a visual depiction of what you can get in terms of the Vidya, the teaching. They go together. But notice, if you're writing in Sarada script, you can make different philosophical implications from your Om, because your Om is written differently than the Om in Devanagari. But therefore, it's helpful to know this. Many people don't know this, that Sanskrit is not just in Devanagari. Remember, you're Americans, and you're receiving a tradition that I think we in India have not been as responsible in conveying. Because even today, many Americans don't understand, or many Westerners, even Indians don't understand that Sanskrit is not just in Devanagari. It's also in Sarada, it's also in Granthi. Granthi is a popular script in South India for Sanskrit, and it's also in Tamil.
Or even IS.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's something new, right? Like, we have something called IST, and because of like computer reasons, the dot now is no longer over the M, it's under the M. It's like interesting, like, how do we even start, like, you might find older text that use like double O's. Like they translate, so you don't know how to pronounce something. So we have to, pronunciation is important because it's Leviosa. If you say something else, you might be vomiting snails or something. So learning how to pronounce things is very important. So going very slowly, making sure you like honor all which lines does what dot does what. Like being able to see it on a page is helpful. It's a tool that we should use. And being able to hear it is very important, which brings me to another point. A lot of our masters were great musicians. Learn music. Yes? Because develop your ear. And it's an easy instruction because most of you already love music. If you didn't love music, if you didn't love art, you probably wouldn't even be spiritual. I mean, arguably, like, spirituality requires a certain level of sensitivity to life, and that's just what an artist is, what a poet is. A person who's open to life and interested in life and moved by beauty. Like we saw those double rainbows. That was an art experience, yeah.
Another difference between English and Sanskrit when it comes to spiritual and psychological aspects is as you say, the flattening. English has the word consciousness.
Yes.
And because of the flatness of that word,
exactly,
we can't even agree what it means.
That's a really good point.
A multitude of people, scientists, philosophers, religious people, debating that word as opposed to the specificity of Sanskrit.
Exactly, which has so many words for the same thing. So it's a very important point that you're making, because there are very, very smart people who have no idea what the word consciousness means because of the nature of the language that they're using when they speak. It's not their fault. It's not the lack of their intelligence. It's just that the tool that they're using, namely the English language, through no fault of its own. I love English, and almost entirely my instruction is in English. Why? Because I'm born in the context of the British colonial world where English is the lingua franca. Maybe 20 years from now I would prefer Mandarin or something, and if I was in Alexandria, I would like to speak to you in Greek. In other words, I have no problem using the language of my current historical era in order to convey ideas that I learned in a different language. But because of that, we have to acknowledge that difference. I've noticed in the past few years, I haven't been as sensitive to that difference. I haven't really understood the ways in which Americans think that are different from the ways in which Indians think. And I just assume that Americans think like Indians. And I realized like, no, Christianity, its influence in America is interesting. The way that it shapes the way that we, like, and it's valid. And that's what Thakur is asking us to do. Shri Krishna is asking us to engage in a very complicated, globalized world with ideas that are different from ours. But therefore now I want to point to those differences because that will lead us to a deeper unity, I think. You know, instead of like just saying it's all one and flattening everything based on a very like specific understanding, which is also valid. So coming back to this point, the English language is so complex, though it wasn't made to be arguably, I'm not saying it is. I often premise everything with arguably, by the way, because arguably it is the case that English is made as a lingua franca to refer to objects in the external world for the sake of trade and for the sake of managing the bureaucratic nightmare that is an empire.
And science.
And science, yeah. And so and science is an inquiry most of the time of the external world. That's why it falls flat often when it comes to things like consciousness. Because consciousness is internal, it's subjective. And therefore, it's not really what science is for as far as science is concerned now. Like, it can be what science is about, except it would have to rethink a lot of things. Even the language in which it conducts itself. So, it makes sense to play golf in a certain way. You're not on a golf course now, right? This is like a fencing room or a ballet room or something like that. If you bring golf understanding here, it's good on the golf court, it won't work here. And that's where the tension is. And so we're making a claim based on a text that we often haven't even read. Or even if we had it, we wouldn't know how to read. That's the thing about Christianity. It's like we have access to the literature, but we don't consider how much the literature has been edited, the broken game of telephone usage, but also the game of like translations and how the word pharmakia might become the word witch, you know, how different translations can also lead to different interpretations, and so how each pastor is interpreting their text is going to determine what kind of Christianity that congregation practices. So in what sense, there are as many Christianities as there are Christians. It's not just that there are 45,000 registered sects of Christianity, which means the word Christian is very complex. But each sect, each of those 45,000 sects is also composed of people, and each person has their own interpretation of their sect, which is an interpretation of Christianity. And there are at least 45,000 different ways to interpret who the fuck Christ is.
This is true. I was in at least 7 different sects of Christianity.
They all
Each
disagree.
one had their own flavor.
Exactly, and it's good. It's good that everyone interacts with things the way that they know how. And that's why Paratantra and Swatantra is going to become very important here. Because also you have to remember that Indians, I think, also. I don't need to do that. I'm going to step back and just come back to this point. Yeah, 'cause, this point is important. Let me just finish this thought. Okay, just give me a second. Let me just finish these, and then we'll open for satsang. Okay? Let me just get through the material. So this point, that English is made as a imperial language to bring together the bureaucratic system of an empire and help that empire transact with material things. That's why it's good for science, because science is often about those material things. Now, English is supposed to be simple. It's supposed to be obvious. It's supposed to refer to things that are objective, shared experience. And yet it's so fucking complex. Isn't that interesting? How much more true then is this for Sanskrit, which is not even a language? See, this is a very important point. In India, we understand some things are Prakrits and some things are Sanskrit. Tamil is a Prakrit, but it's somewhat like a Sanskrit. But like Prakrits would be like languages that develop naturally through humans interacting and transacting in the shared reality which we call the objective world. Those languages develop. Sanskrit is not like that. Sanskrit is not made to develop with time. It's like C++ or it's like Python or something. It's a coding language, and it's supposed to be the source code of the universe. So use like Arabic or Hebrew or like many languages that try to do this, and Sanskrit is trying to do this. It's trying to be like archetypical language. So putting aside academic points about the Proto-Indo-European language or whatever, it's just like the way Sanskrit understands itself is in the word Sanskrit itself. Sanskrit means artificial. Is that beautiful? Samskrita. And that's different from the word Prakrita. Prakrita means natural. So there are natural languages like English. And now English is the Prakrit, the natural language that many people, not all people, but many people in the world use because of the British colony, right? Because of American media, because of various reasons. And maybe that will change. Maybe it'll be Mandarin. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it'll be Russian. Like, the world is always changing. And what language is the natural language of choice in that cultural period is up for grabs based on which power is in power at that time. But now it's English, as it stands, I think. But not everybody speaks English, but a lot of people do, so much so that it makes sense that most of what you hear in the tantric kind of Hindu world probably be told to you in English. Even like in French, it's probably like a translation of an English text, as it were. And English text may be a translation of German text. But to be fair, Germans were one of the first few, like Schopenhauer or whatever, to be interested in the Upanishads and would start translating them into German or whatever. But anyway, English is probably the medium in which you're likely to hear these things. And notice, English is a very complex language also. But these texts were not written in English. They were not written in English for an English-speaking audience. They were written in this very specific language called Samskrita, or at least they were conveyed in this Samskrita, which is supposed to be, unlike a Prakrita, natural language, a technical and precise and specific language for the task. What is the task? Mapping an incredibly complex internal reality, which is at least intersubjective, if not entirely subjective. So Sanskrit is not for communicating with others, although you can use it that way. There are places in Kerala, by the way, one of the most learned states in, statistically speaking, if you use the word learned to mean can read and write, it's one of the most literate. I think literate's a better word. Literate. Let's use that. You see, even that, the word learned could have connotations that are problematic.
Yeah.
Say, a person who is illiterate is not learned is very inappropriate in India, where a person might never have read, but might know more about high works of Ramayana, Mahabharata than like the most well-read person here in this country. It's like, it's very interesting how learning and reading and writing, how all those are related, numeracy and whatnot. But you say like literate, right? Like can you read? Can you write? And you could say Kerala has some of the highest rates of that. But part of that like tradition also means that there are places in Kerala, and of course various other places in India too, like Mithila used to be associated with very refined Kashmir and Tamil Nadu and whatnot. But in Kerala, now, today also, there are people who speak Sanskrit to each other. It's like they use it as a Prakrit. But although that's true, although you can use it in that way, it was usually for revelatory text. That's like Shiva, like say the Ashtadhyayi, a very important foundational text on Sanskrit grammar. The 14 verses called the Maheshvara Sutra is Lord Shiva revealing the meaning of certain sounds by playing his damaru. So it's a religious experience, like Lord Shiva, the god Shiva, is playing his damaru. Let's play a damaru. And the sounds of the damaru, the sound, is heard by Panini, this rishi, and he downloads the Sanskrit language. You notice it's not like we as a community interacting with one another develop a language through some semiotic and semantic, and like there's a whole cool linguistic theory that we can get into that we shouldn't get into because I don't have the credentials for. There's a very cool and sophisticated way to talk about language in the academic context. But this is different. This is a religious context in which this language is revealed. It's God revealing language to us, as opposed to us humans developing a language together. So again, this central theme of like God and human and who's saying what, So coming back to this, it's like English is developing a lot. Like the word witch and the word bitch, these are all changing. But in Sanskrit, the thing is so cool about Sanskrit is that it's in one sense kind of fixed. But in another sense, it's way subtler, way richer, way more flexible, way more fluid, way more inclusive, way more diverse, and way more dynamic than even our most rapidly changing natural languages. And that has to do with the way Sanskrit words are constructed grammatically. So a Sanskrit word has a dhatu. This is arguably your first Sanskrit lesson. I mean, how would you start learning Sanskrit? I would argue the first thing to do is to familiarize yourself with syllabary, meaning the bijas or what you call aksharas or varnas. So every day just I, u, la, and there's also some debate as to how do you say that, ri, or ra. You're like, anyway, a, I, o, au, ang, gang, 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 like that. You learn these, and you should be able to chant them, front to back, and back to front. Now, if you learn to do puja, don't worry, that's built into your syllabus. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to actually now go and do that, because if you're going to learn puja, you'll have to do that, because it's part of the nyasas. See, so much of what you're doing in the tantric world is based on language, and even the mantra, the whole tradition is mantra-based. Mantra marga, we call it, the path of the mantra. Mantras are composed of bijas, sounds. And those sounds are ordered in this sequence called a through to ha, or a through to ksha. But wait, check this out. That's not the only way to arrange the letters. Isn't that crazy? When people learn Sanskrit, they're like, oh, you know what Sanskrit alphabet is? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You guys went to kindergarten and you were taught here in the West that there's one way in which all the letters are arranged. And you were forced to learn it and memorize it in this A, B, C, D, E, F, G song, right? And then you want me to give you the same thing when it comes to Sanskrit. I'm sorry, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to flatten a very refined and complex tradition by saying this is the way the words are presented and this is the way they look on paper. we're graduated kindergarten now. There are other ways to list the letters, and the connotations then matter, because like in bija nyasa, or in say anga nyasa or kara nyasa in the ritual, if you do matrika order, that might have a certain effect energetically speaking. Matrika order is matrika krama, we call it, is arranging the letters in this way: a, I, u, and you separate the vowels from the consonants, and the consonants are arranged in a particular logic. Ka, ka, ga, ga, nga being gutturals, like cha, sha, ta, ta. Like cha, cha, pa, pa, nya being palatals, and like that, like retroflex, dental. There's a logic to how those letters are arranged in the matrika system. Naturally, that's going to be the most popular system, because that logic is very intuitive and very beautiful and very commonly referred to in the context of philosophical and ritual circles. But there's another order. And that order is very important to us as Shaktas. And in fact, it's more esoteric. Yeah, what is it? Malini, exactly. Malini order. And not many people know about Malini. But it's important that we know about Malini, because a lot of our rituals are in Malini, actually, because a lot of what we do is referencing the Malini Vijayotara Tantra. So what is Malini? It's when you mix the vowels into the consonants, and you end up with a sequence that goes from na all the way through pa. So now it's not a through ksha anymore, it's na through pa. So imagine one day you walk into your kindergarten and now people aren't singing A, B, C, D, E, F, G anymore. They're singing X, H, Y, X, H, T, A, C, L, O. That's what it sounds like. Malini is very different from Matrika. And it's another valid way to arrange the letters. And arranging the letters in this way gives you different ritual implications, different philosophical implications. You change your whole life to think in this new way. So you guys, look at what we're doing. We're deconstructing the entire mind, because the mind is nothing but language. Language is nothing but words are nothing but sound. And in those sounds, there's subjectivity. So if on this level you think there's one way to do Sanskrit, one way to speak Sanskrit, you've already lost the game of Hinduism. Yeah. You cannot do Hinduism if you proceed with a surety even in thought, in language. Even that we question. In Nyaya, we take our sword to everything. And then it's a very skilled swordsman, or swordswoman, or swordsperson that comes to the table. Arguably, before you can even start studying Tantra, you have to already have this like swordsmanship, swordswomanship, swordspersonship. And so we ask, what is the sword? It's language. What is language? It's sounds. These sounds must be learned first, arguably. So you practice, Matrika or Malini, and then, you practice saying them together. So the word aham, you take the word ah and ha, and you learn what the Anuswara does and what the Visarga does. And so this will help you with your pronunciation, but it also helps you understand what words mean. So like, for instance, when we're talking about upachara, we have to break it down, right? We say chara means achara, and then upachara. I would say it's like a, what is it we saying the other day? Panartha udakam, or something. Pani, artha, udakam. We have to understand these words, and then we can understand the word panartha udakam, which brings us to another point, sandhi. Sandhi means ways that words are joined together in Sanskrit, and there's a beautiful sort of, let's say, musical logic to this process. They're brought together in a way that makes sense harmonically and musically. So if I take a sound that ends with a and I combine it with another sound that starts with a, then the two coming together will become it becomes long. So I take the word Bhairava in Hindi, sometimes they don't say that. Right? They say Bhairava. I take the word Bhairava, and if I take the word Ananda and I bring them together, I'll get Bhairavananda. Right? Instead of Bhairavananda, it's Bhairavananda. Or like if I say, if I take the word Kula and Ishwari and I bring them together, the A plus the E usually becomes an A, so it becomes Kuleshwari. So Kula Ishwari, Kula Ishwari, Kula Ishwari, Kula Ishwari. If I keep saying that over and over, it'll become Kuleshwari. Eventually the I will A. J, Namastasya. Like there's such a logic to all of this, right? The way that basic sounds come together and sonically turn into other sounds. So like and then E and oo, or A, I, O, ow. These are sounds that are made of smaller sounds that come together and contribute to a larger sound. So like knowing that is important, how those sounds come about, because when you look at a word, to break that word up requires some understanding in sandhi. Like Mahabharata. Maha is different from Bharata. But that's easy because like, there's not that much, there's no sandhi, there's Mahabharata, it's just two words together, compound. But what if you took words like, I don't know, the Vajrodake Hum Pat Swaha. That was a mantra we looked at in the Padati the other night, right? Pradosha night, we were looking over the Padati, and there was a mantra there. Vajrodake Hum Pat Swaha. Now, what are the two words there? Can you tell me? Vajrodake is a compound of two words. In fact, those words could even be broken down further, as you can see. But Vajrodake is a compound of two words. Vajra. First part is Vajra, right? Vajra. Now, what does an A combine with to turn into an O sound? This is a Sandhi rule. A plus what makes O? Because Vajrodake, you know the word Vajra is Vajra, it ends with an A, right? But in this word, in this compound, it's Vajrodake. So, in Vajrodake, it's very important. How did you get that O? Because you know the Vajra ends with A, right? Was it? Exactly. A plus U gets O, right? Om. Like the logic is actually, you see, you guys, when you learn Sanskrit, it'll be like putting on shoes that fit. Because it's literally the structure of reality. This sounds like a cultural point I'm making. No one owns Sanskrit. Vedas were not written by Indians. Indians realized something. And when they point it out to you, you'll realize it's as much your property as it is ours. It's not cultural. It's just reality. And cultures, different cultures, are trying to interpret that same reality. And so when you learn Sanskrit, it'll just click. It'll be like, oh my God, I see it now. Because it's just real, it's just true. True in a deeper way than cultures can be true, than our pockets can be true. That's why I use a lot of Sanskrit words. I refer to a lot of Sanskrit text. Because if I speak to you in English, we're both fucked. And I'm speaking to you in English now. But everything that I say in English is to point you to a different culture, a different tradition that I would love if I could share, if you would participate in. And we're doing that, we're chanting the Kali Sahasranam and everything. But let's start with first principle. And the first principle is literally the sounds that compose the words that turn into the sentences, that turn into the language, that turn into the linguistic structures that shape the way that we think and feel and show up for life. So we start there. From the very bottom, we say the texts called the Tantras are most of the time conveyed in Sanskrit. Sanskrit as a language is different from other languages, because they're not prakrits. They don't develop in the way other languages develop. They're more like coding languages. And Sanskrit is basically composed of these sounds called matrikas. And the first step in learning Sanskrit is to learn the matrikas. And then to understand that there are different ways to learn that also, Malini, Matrika, etc. So Vajra Udake, it's like Vajra plus Udake. So it's like, okay, now we know that there was Udaka even, like Vajra, Udaka. And then the ending A, like Durge as opposed to Durga, is like vocative, gives you an emotional flavor. So, hey, Shive, as opposed to Shiva. Hey Shiva means like, oh Shiva. Hey Durga is a vocative form. So that after you learn the matrikas, then you start like looking at words in a new way. So a good game that you can play is after you learn matrikas, after you learn some sandhi. I'm just giving you like a basic sort of strategy for approaching Sanskrit, because that's, I think, the first thing that I want to do with this community is emphasize that. That's why I think we've gone in many other places far afield of what was in the text, because we don't care about the text, we don't read the text. I care about the text. That's my first kind of value in our community, is that we have checks and balances, but we have to be willing to use them, and you have to be empowered to use them. A lot of people hide behind text. They're like, oh, this text says that, and if you believe me, you're fucked. I don't want you to have to believe me. I think I'm telling the truth, but also I'm interpreting. I'm telling you what I think the text says, because I read the text. Now why don't you go read it and see what you think of it, and then see if what I said about it and what you read in it checks out. Like, call me out, ask for citations, I'll give them to you. Right? I'm willing to give you the citations, but I have many people complaining of a sort of intellectual dishonesty in me, who themselves will not actually, not only ask for citations, but who themselves cannot follow up on the check and balances that I'm trying so hard to present. So coming back to this learning music thing, Sanskrit is not just written, it's also heard. And so when you sit in an atmosphere, and if I say, Om Vajrodake Om Pat Swaha, like, it's a musical sense that allows you to repeat that. If I say, Om Vajradake Om Pat Swaha, and then it's time for you to repeat it, if you didn't hear what I said, then your repetition also. So let's try an experiment. This is a good practice. I'm going to try Om. I'm going to chant Om. Join me. Like, in other words, tune to me. Ready? Om. Isn't that beautiful? Like, you'll notice when you kind of come in, it changes the whole vibration. As opposed to, this is what usually happens. People say, let's chant Om together, right? And somebody will just start aggressively, be, and somebody else will go, they're all a different, Om and shit is like, bro. And everyone is asserting their own thing. So when you want to chant Om, don't chant right away. Wait for the person who's like leading it. Just now, like say, Devi was leading the Kali Sahasranam. You follow, meaning you listen to her tone, match that. Or stay right behind it. But like what happens, people just all jump in when they chant Om. So when somebody says Om, and now I'm leading, I'm going to chant Om, you wait, you hear it, and then only chant it, isn't it? And then you kind of flow into it. And then once you flow into it, then you can play with intervals and stuff. That's really cool. So it's helpful to have the tanpura. That's why I notice so much of the rituals we do in this space and in general tantric circles. It's like, it's nice to have a tanpura because the tanpura creates a sort of base that everybody can agree on. Now in Indian music, we don't like tune to 440, what do you call it? 444 hertz C or something. Everyone has a different C. You know, it's interesting. And when you sit down to do Indian music, you like listen to the lead instrument and you tune to that. Is that so beautiful? Like in Western music, there is a C, there's a frequency that we all tune to. But in Indian music, we tune to whoever is leading the thing. It's so cool. It's like it's a whole different way of looking at things, which will bring me back to Swatantra and Paratantra later in a few moments. But coming back to this point about language, you would start learning Sanskrit by learning the bijas, or otherwise known as aksharas or varnas. That itself will be really rewarding because it will help in our pronunciation. It will help. It will radically change the way it feels to chant things. It will feel more like meaningful, like doing a hatha yoga pose in proper alignment. It will feel different. It will feel sensible and rewarding. And you know what's so beautiful about these hymns? Even if you do them poorly, they'll be awesome. Right? If you like do a hatha yoga pose poorly, it'll still be quite valuable, I think. It could hurt you, but also it could be cool. But if you do it correctly, it's even more cool. Like, whatever you love about like hymns and stotrams and chanting, when you take the time to learn the Sanskrit, like then when you chant it, you get so much more out of it. So pronunciation brings so much more meaning to the practice. So you start with that, then you sandhi, and then through learning sandhi and through learning matris, that might be enough actually. And then maybe just like learning cases, like a vocative case, as opposed to like Purnamada, Purnamedam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate, that Purnat, that case, from Purnam arises, like that. Like learning cases can be helpful because then when you look at mantras in your padati, they'll mean something to you. But it doesn't even require vocabulary at this point. It just requires a little bit of grammar. And by the way, if you had vocabulary but not grammar, it would still be quite difficult to understand how words fit together. Vocabulary is what words mean, and then grammar is how those words fit together and what they mean when they're together, because the meaning might change when words are together. Isn't that beautiful? Like words don't mean anything unless they're with other words.
Natural languages, the grammar can sometimes be less important. Like you can say fairly gibberish English grammar.
Yes, exactly.
Across in Sanskrit.
Thank you. That's a big point. Like computer grammar is different from regular grammar. That's the point, right? Like it comes down to this. Grammar is so important when it comes to coding AIs. Like what is an AI? It's a grammatical model. And what is a grammar? Understanding how sounds fit with other sounds or how symbols fit with other symbols. Like it's organizing information, right? And here's the thing. Grammar is basically what you study when you study Sanskrit. It's not vocabulary, it's grammar. It's like, and grammar is very precise, very deep. So there are different grammars. So what's the like most popular grammar or like the text par excellence? And you should know this, we should all know this, we should be familiar with this text. It's a very difficult text. I don't understand most of this text. Like I should be working harder to like study and understand this text. I leave it to Bhaidavananda because he's much smarter than me and like he's good at that. And he codes, right? He's got a mind for it. Not really that, but Swamiji also, it's very important. Like Swamiji worked really hard at it. It was important to him to learn grammar. What's the text here?
I don't know the name of the text, but it's by Panini, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's by Panini. Yeah. You know, you guys have paninis to eat. Panini. By the way, you guys, the Pulisadam and the Chakrasadam, they're there. So you know, please help yourself.
I already put them in the oven.
Yeah, thank you. Jaima.
Oh.
Jaima. Okay, so grammar is what we study when we study Sanskrit, and there's a grammar, arguably, that most people study. It's like kind of the universal book to study. It's called the Ashtadhyayi. Ashtadhyayi, attributed to the sage Panini. And it's a religious book because in that book, Panini has a revelation of Shiva. Like Shiva is teaching Panini grammar. So in one sense, even Sanskrit grammar is Shaiva in one sense because it's the Maheshvara Sutras. The first, like there are 14 verses in that book. But it's the Maheshvara Sutras that give us a lot of what we understand when it comes to the way sounds work. Isn't that so sweet to think about? Like Shiva playing his damaru introduces grammar. And so Patanjali doesn't just teach yoga. It's so important to me that Patanjali doesn't just teach yoga. He also teaches grammar, right? Many people in the yoga teacher training, they learn can you chant that, the Patanjali, I forgot it. There's like a dhyana mantra for Patanjali in the Iyengar tradition.
Yeah, in the Iyengar.
Baho Purusha Akaram, Shankacha, Sdaranam, should I say Svetam? I forgot it, but there's for Panini, Patanjali, the Yoga Sutra guy. It describes him as like this serpent, Vishnu's serpent couch incarnated, white clothes. It describes him holding a sword. I love that he's got a sword. But it says whose teachings on Ayurveda, the Vidya, the knowledge of Ayush life, science, right, or medicine, or like health, whose teachings on health, whose teachings on grammar, and whose teachings on yoga have brought an end to human suffering. When we do spirituality, we do it in a strong body and a sound mind. In America, it's people with broken bodies and broken minds that come to spiritual spaces. Is it any surprise then that it's all so fucked? You know? Swami Vivekananda emphasized strong body above all, because it's the foundation upon which everything is built. And so it's interesting because he would say, controversially in India, he would say things like this: you would get closer to God playing football than studying the Gita. So often, here we are studying metaphysical concepts that we're never going to be able to understand because we don't even understand how to be like physically well. And that doesn't mean health, because health is karma. So I mean, it's not really that. It's just like kind of knowing like what you're like, being in touch with your body almost. It's not about like not having medical conditions. Who doesn't? Given the food that we have, we're all fucked physically. Don't like this statement. I think can also exclude in the modern context because most of us are born fucked. Do you know what I mean? Like we all have various health things. Like for this body, it's asthma. For somebody else, Swamiji might have also had asthma. It's like
it's more about the relationship to your body.
Exactly. I smoke cigarettes, and people are like, "Dude, you have asthma." I'm like,
"Yeah." And sometimes even having particular physical ailments can be
good for your health.
The necessity of understanding your body.
Exactly. Like, that's a very tantric point. Like being ill, quote unquote, can make you healthier.
Yes.
Because it puts you in touch with the body. And we say like, what is health if not, some people define it as just not being aware of your body, because when you're sick you're very aware of the body. You only think about the body. A lot of your energy goes to the body, and you say like the less energy that goes to the body, the more is freed up for the mind maybe. And so like what health feels like is just feeling comfortable, and feeling comfortable might be like just not fussing about a toothache or something. You know what I mean? It's like, and how do you get that? I mean, through a kind of sensible living. But that's why I absolutely abhor the idea that there's a fixed amount of time that people need to sleep. No, I will sleep how much I need to sleep. You know, I will sleep how much is healthy for me to sleep, and that's not for anyone to decide. That's an interesting point. Like I can just, you know, and everything. And it's like, look, it's like people take stimulants and things. It takes more than a stimulant to be able to stay up these many nights and still be healthy. You know what I mean? Like eventually people will crash, and that kind of understanding of when do I crash, what are patterns that are not good for me, that's what is meant by health. And it's an individual journey. But there's still some logic and science and sort of shared understanding that we can benefit from. So Patanjali teaches that. He teaches Ayurveda. Isn't that so beautiful? He isn't just a spiritual teacher. He's also just on this property. Sambhavi is working really hard to create like programs for like kalari and like physical development, like martial arts. And Swamiji really valued that. In the Aurobindo ashram, you also get a lot of programs like that. Why? Because we're all in the Ramakrishna lineage. Is Aurobindo in the Ramakrishna lineage? As much as Swamiji is. And especially because when you look at how they do spirituality, in their centers, there's a strong emphasis on physical health. You know, and you'll see that's true of yoga, the yogic tradition. The body becomes important because the body becomes a tool, an instrument. So you get Hatha yoga and Kuleshwari is teaching Hatha yoga classes here. Like that's so important, you know. So it's like if you're not doing Hatha yoga, if you're not going to the gym or running or hiking or like building things or digging holes, whatever, if you're not like using the body, then you're not developing a very important foundational tool that will be required for all the spiritual stuff that we're going to do later. So Ayurveda is one of the three things that Patanjali, quote-unquote, taught. Whether or not he's a fictional or metaphorical figure is beside the point here. The very fact that there are these three things implies something about how this tradition wants to do spirituality. So the first is Ayurveda. The second is grammar, which teaches you something else. What is grammar for? Will you realize God through learning Sanskrit? Absolutely not. No amount of help or no amount of intelligence will ever help you realize God. So grammar is not for spirituality, and nor is it for physical health. It's for the mind. Grammar is the whetstone upon which you sharpen the sword of the mind. So like learn grammar, study Ashtadhyayi. It's so hard. Like I mean, I'm struggling with Ashtadhyayi, but it's good to study because then it's so hard, and that's how we grow. You know. So what I'm presenting is hard. Like when you chant Kali Sahasranam, it's hard. Lalita Sahasranam is hard. Like don't forget, like Sanskrit is hard. Because it's requiring a level of intellect that I'm sorry to say, but most education systems around the world, what to say of this country, just don't provide. You know, they're all training you to like be employees in corporations based on models developed by people who had that agenda. What will you do when it comes to studying traditions that require more of you? That's what I'm saying. It's like not, I don't feel like it's, I think we should be clear that the traditions require a lot of us. And so when we love these traditions, we love something we want to know. And what it means to know is to develop the tool through which we know, the mind. So grammar is for that. So learning Sanskrit, learning grammar, all this is really important. And it's based on these Ayurvedic things or grammar things that spiritual and metaphysical points are made, and vice versa. So they're all kind of related. So you see Swami Vivekananda, he took he emphasized Sanskrit not just for his own spiritual life, but he also insisted upon the other disciples of Sri Ramakrishna in learning Sanskrit. That's interesting because Sri Ramakrishna is often hailed as this illiterate, even unlearned guy, if not just unlettered, he's unlettered. No, the guy could write. I mean, there's evidence of Sri Ramakrishna writing, Jai Shri Radha, Swamiji will teach inside, Sri Ramakrishna wrote something, he writes. And if you think that Sri Ramakrishna is unlettered, it's only because we think that education comes through reading books. But Sri Ramakrishna learned in a very Indian way. He had a steel trap memory, which is, I think, the Indian trope. My memory, impeccable, right? Why? It was drilled into me from childhood. My God, you think it was easy? I'd sit there memorize shit, bro. I'd just again and again and again. I would come to my grandfather, he would say a line, I would repeat it back. He wouldn't give me the next line until I memorized the first line. That's just our culture. I went to a school where what it meant was to just write things on a piece of paper during the exam that you memorized the night before. So I come from a cramming culture where it's memorize things, and it's helped me so much. But unfortunately in this country, you don't put a lot of emphasis on memory. Why? Because you have your phones, you have your books. But in India, things survive because they're passed orally. And the only way that they can be passed with integrity is if the people who are passing them on can remember what was said. So memory becomes more develop that. Right? So it's part of your intellectual exercise in learning Sanskrit is also memorizing Sanskrit texts, which is kind of easy to do if you just repeat them every day. So the key to memory is repetition. And that discipline, that cultivation of repeating things over and over until they become natural to you, or just by force. A lot of times, we have to learn and memorize things in a time period that didn't allow for that. We don't have that deadline here. Yeah, it's unnatural. So if I had an exam tomorrow, I would have to by force just memorize something. I don't care about learning. I just memorize it. And my grandfather was interesting because I would, as a young, precocious, intellectually, Mercury, first house, Gemini, Venus kind of person, I'll be what does this word mean? And he was that's not important right now. He's be patient. Right now, you're just memorizing it. And now I see the wisdom in what he said. It was now I just have to download this shit. I can think about what it means later. He's got limited time. He's my grandfather. It's up to me now to decipher and inquire into what he said. But right now, I just have to get what he said. I should be able to repeat back verbatim what he said. And it's not what he said, it's what Shiva said. And he's forcing me, in one sense, to just memorize that shit. And so I have this distinct memory of asking for clarity, what does this mean? What does that mean? Fuck that, memorize it. But notice I sometimes take a different approach in this country. I'm no, learn what it means first. It's both. Right? It's memorize it and learn what it means. But in Indian culture, you can see, and by Indian, I'm going to be very careful. I don't just mean the political nation state called India. I mean the Indic civilization that includes maybe Tibet and Pakistan and Bangladesh and maybe even Sri Lanka and who knows what else, some parts of Central Asia, I don't know. But that Indic civilization, you'll notice throughout its history, as early as the Vedic period, it's all oral and it's all based on rote memorization, which is then passed on. And there are beautiful linguistic studies on the Vedic oral transmission. They find startling integrity in it. It's not a game of broken telephone. Weirdly enough, somebody said something to somebody, who 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 9,000 years later is saying the same thing. What the fuck? There must be something about the grammar in which that language is. It's the grammar. It's something about Sanskrit that protects against broken telephone. So I actually have some sympathy for those people who didn't want the Bible to be translated into other languages. Of course I want all Sanskrit texts to be translated to every language so everybody can read it in their own language. But I also don't want you to forget that if you just read it in your own language and you don't interact with it in Sanskrit, something is lost. And maybe Christianity, I don't know, is trying to use Latin in this way. I don't know. Maybe there's a different power to praying in Latin as opposed to praying in English. And if you cared about your tradition, and by this tradition I mean the Roman Catholic tradition, wouldn't you want to learn in Latin? Wouldn't you want to say Ave Maria? Wouldn't you want to say the prayer in the way that the Catholic tradition said it in times of yore? But it's funny, there's a kind of, something is lost in popularization. Something is gained in esoterization. I want both. I want the integrity of esoteric secret knowledge to be preserved while we make it available to everyone, everywhere.
That's the Indian way.
Yeah, but see, the Indian way in Tantra is not to reveal the shit. The Indian way is to make it secret. We as a culture have reverence for refinement and also an understanding that not everybody will put in the time and the work, and not everybody should or needs to. Not everybody should think about shit. You guys have to fucking think about shit. Do you know what I mean? You're here. Be Brahmins, motherfucker. I was born Kshatriya, but okay, I'm telling you, like, this is Brahmins' work, meaning intellectual work. It was the intellect that dealt with these things, right? So, but not everybody has to do that. It's not for everybody, but it's for us. We're interested in these things. And so we're interacting with the culture for whom developing the mind was very important, right? So the Indian context is kind of like, well, only Brahmins need to think about this. So they only need to learn Sanskrit. Nobody else needed to learn Sanskrit. Nobody else needed to bother themselves with Sanskrit grammar. Nobody else even needed to perform rituals. The rituals of Tantra, the Vedic world, the Vedic rituals, Tantric rituals, wedding rituals, funeral rituals. It's not for everybody to perform. It's for a specific group of people in society whose task it was to live and die for this stuff. Ideally because they loved it, because it came naturally to them.
The Indian way is to blend the esoteric with the structure that intellect provides.
See, ideally, but we don't, right? Like I said, that's the thing. There's no Indian way. It's like there's like this very vast plethora, but you can say there's something that's there as like a beating heart, and you can see like what we've emphasized when it comes to Sanskrit study and the linguistic structures and the grammars and all these things is like this integrity, which required secrecy, preservation. It required small communities, almost like hoarding the knowledge, as it were, because you can't teach it to everybody, and nor should you. But it's not for everybody, as it were, right? So ideally, if you wanted to learn this stuff, you would have access to it. But of course, as the way culture developed in India, it's like maybe some people who would want to learn it can't learn it, or who are discouraged from learning it. And people who can learn it don't want to learn it, and you're forced to learn it. So that's what's changing now. We now live in a world that might actually look like ancient India. I don't know what ancient India looked like, but ideally, we have this fantasy that it was a world where there was a lot of like mobility, where you as a Brahmin could decide to like be a Kshatriya like Dronacharya. He's still a Brahmin, but he likes to fight. So he's hanging out in the court of kings, not in his capacity of a teacher. He's still a Brahmin, but he's like a militant Brahmin. Like he's a fighter Brahmin, ruler Brahmin, which is different from say a scholarly Kshatriya like Buddha or something. It's like it's in these fluid concepts. And even within the Brahmin's world, there are different kinds of Brahmins, like Dr. Brahmin, the Ayurvedic Brahmin, the the kind of doctor class of Brahmins, and there's like a ritual priest class of Brahmins. And you'd be surprised to note that the priests are kind of looked down upon in the Brahmin community, because being associated with the temple means selling those things that ought not be sold, making a living off of those things that you should not buy and sell. And so Brahmins who do rituals, priests, usually have a bad rep in India. It's very important that Sri Ramakrishna is a Brahmin priest, because the priest is like the Shudra of the Brahmins. Within the context of Brahmins, some Brahmins say, I'm of a lineage that never touched a plow. Meaning I'm a Brahmin who was so good at being a Brahmin that I was always patronized by kings and I never had to myself work. Now, what does that mean? It means that I was so good at my job that I didn't have to like give up my job for another job, who's someone else's job. But many Brahmins are farming because they just aren't good at their job, arguably. And not just that, even if they were, this society has changed so much that no one is willing to sponsor them. Because ideally, in the Indian context, a Kshatriya or some Vaishya or some wealthy person would sponsor a Brahmin, provide a house, provide land, provide materials for that Brahmin to do his job. But that Brahmin himself would be poor. He would not own any of these things. You know what I mean? It's like the Brahmin does not sell. That's a Vaishya's job. The Brahmin does not build or protect. That's maybe a Kshatriya's job. The Brahmin's job is to think and to meditate and to pray and to inquire. It's the shaman. And that shaman is nurtured and protected by a society who understands the shaman's value. But the moment we forget that value, then it becomes commerce. You know, it becomes like, I have to make a living, so I have to sell a workshop, and therefore I have to change my message to become saleable. That's when there's a lack of integrity, because money can often change a message in order to like make it more popular. So popularization is dangerous in one sense, because it's like trying to make something for everybody when it's not for everybody, which might change that thing. So that's one of the complexities we've had recently when it comes to Tantra and Shiva, even the word Shiva, like Shaivism, Tantra, Hinduism. It's like, we can't forget that a lot of the teachers of Hinduism back in the day, arguably, were state-sponsored. And in the Tantric world, some of the best material, like say Jayarata's commentary on the Tantra Loka, it was only possible because a very rich king was sponsoring Jayarata. And even the Tantra Loka, one of the most important exegetical secondary sources in the Tantric tradition, That was only possible because Abhinavagupta inherited land from his ancestor Atrigupta, who was in the court of one, Lakshmi, what's the name of the king? I think it's actually kind of important. Knowing who was writing during the time of Avanti Varman is important because you can understand historical forces. And there was a very important king, Lakshmi Aditya, Lakshmi Dara, whoops. But Lakshmi Aditya. No, Lalita Aditya, yes. Very, very important king, Lalita Aditya, from Kannauj, right? He came and took over that kingdom in Kashmir, and he brought with him this guy Atrigupta, whose descendant is Abhinavagupta. So these are like Rajanakas, we call them, like Rajanaka, Kshema Raja, Rajanaka, Abhinavagupta, meaning Brahmins who were so intelligent, so holy, so good at being Brahmins that that's all they ever did. They never had to touch the plow, they never had to be a priest, they were just paid by a king to like literally just think and teach, and they would have families, and like they're not sadhus in that sense, but they're ripe in that they're good at their job, and not everybody has to do that job. So Abhinavagupta was probably never a priest in the Hindu temple context. He never needed to make his money in that way. He just had all this land. He was a trust fund kid. Whoops. Sorry, karma is real. Secondly, the second point is important. They gave him leisure, and because of his leisure, he was able to read and write or whatever. And now the question is like, who is that for? Is it for an audience that's different from him? Is there like socio-economical, like cultural things you have to take into consideration here? So with Abhinavagupta, with Kshema Raja, a lot of these were like Rajanakas, state-sponsored Brahmins. Now, Sri Ramakrishna is important because he's a Brahmin in a family that are very serious about being Brahmins, who are very good at being Brahmins, and we learn this in like the Leela Prasanga. We get a portrait of Sri Ramakrishna's father, Shudiram, who is like a perfect person, as it were. But by that is not meant like maybe just a perfect Brahmin. You know what I mean? It's like the virtues that are associated with Shudiram might actually be vices for someone else. You know, like someone else should maybe be fierce, a Brahmin should be meek. Someone else should have money, and a Brahmin should be poor. Poverty and meekness, all things are considered holy for a Brahmin, you know. And Shudiram was so devoted, he would do his ritual every day, and he's the kind of person that would walk for miles and then see a tree with a leaf that was specific for a deity and then pluck that tree and walk all the way back to make the offering. You know, like there's a way in which a Brahmin might think that other people might think is impractical or stupid, but for the Brahmin is the highest virtue. Purity rules, the discipline to follow them. I often speak out against purity rules from a context in which they're very sacred. So in America, sometimes that doesn't work out for me because that sacredness is not yet there. So in America, maybe you start by teaching people to be Brahmins first. Then you teach them to be Abhinavagupta. You know what I mean? Before you can loosen your Upavita, maybe you should get one. You know, like so I'm Indian. I come from a different cultural context, right? Like, and so I'm teaching from another point of that spiritual journey. Maybe like in our community, we might need to emphasize those things first.
You can play jazz, but imagine how good your jazz would sound if you learned classical.
Exactly. And people often misunderstand with some of these artists that, like, say, visual art impressions, where like they think, which is a line that anybody could have done that. No, that person did that because that person has a lifetime of practice behind them. You know, like say, listen to John Coltrane in Kind of Blue, compare him to Love Supreme or like Giant Steps. You're like, oh my God, like this is someone who's a master, and therefore they can do the simplest thing and it will have the deepest meaning. And so with these people like Abhinavagupta, they're breaking rules because they're masters in those rules. They're perfect. Their puja is perfect. That's why they're improvising and being crazy. They're exactly jazz. And I'm talking about jazz, but we maybe have to pause and start with basic music theory. So coming back to basic music theory, here we get with this idea that there are socioeconomic forces that we should take into consideration. And so like say, texts that were written post the Mughal invasion will have a different flavor to them because there's less state patronage of the authors of those texts. And so those texts are more likely to be disseminated in prakrits, which means they're more liable to change. So like that, all these things should be noted. So now we get an oral tradition that's being like taught to us, which is very like memory oriented and very sonically kind of rendered. So like learning music, practicing memory, like learning Sanskrit grammar, all of these things will be very foundational before you can even start Tantra or Shaivism. Hinduism in general, I think, benefits a lot from being able to interact with things in this way, with a musical sense, the developed musical sense, and with a good memory, and with a basic understanding of the language in which most of Hindu materials are presented. You know, so like we have to be careful because the way we make claims in this tradition is to appeal to a text. Often that text is going to be in Sanskrit. Not always, but often it's in Sanskrit. And so then now the good thing is we have access to that text. If we want to say, oh, this is from the Isha Upanishad, I'm going to make a claim. Ishavasyam midagam sarvam yatkinja jagatyang jagata. Okay, that's from the Isha Upanishad. Okay, good. Go online, type it in, you'll find it. Go look at that. It's probably even transliterated, which is so wonderful actually. And then now look at the transliteration, and all your grammar will help you there. The Purnat, Purnam Udachate, from Purnam comes. But then you realize, oh my God, this is a really complicated statement. Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachate, really complicated. It's like you're using the word Purna in two different senses. From Purnam. So if you say Purnam is the cause, Purnam is the effect, you get into a very interesting discussion as to whether or not something has to be distinct from something else to be its cause and for that thing to be its effect. So milk, is it the same as yogurt? In one sense, no. In another sense, yes. But here we're saying milk is the cause, milk is the effect. Can you speak of, look, you see how beautiful this is? And given that, there's infinite ways to read that line. But you can't engage with the interpretative kind of work that we need to do before we can even understand what Purna means. And Purnat means. Like, Ishavasyam midagam sarvam. Like all these things, these are beautiful phrases that they resonate with us emotionally, and we feel the meaning and the truth there. But to intellect into them is to know what the words mean and to know how they fit together. And so grammar will help. But then to memorize them is, I think, our next task, which we get through repetition. The point is, like, sometimes you have to cram for something. Like maybe I have to do a particular ritual and I don't have the padati for whatever reason, I learn it. So cram it the night before or something. But we don't have that same deadline. We have the rest of our lives, and in one sense we have infinite lives. So all we have to do is like repeat. And we have the time every day if we like chant Lalita Sahasranama like every single day. It won't be long before it just comes.
Yes.
You know, it's like you're like, oh, I've heard it so many times, and now it just like flows naturally. But to do that, you have to have a good sense of hearing, a good sense of retention, and Sri Ramakrishna had these things. So Sri Ramakrishna was often called like unlettered or unlearned, but he was just learning in an Indian way. He would sit at the feet of people who would say things that he would remember verbatim and repeat verbatim. So he was very, in that way, he's very learned, but he could also write or whatever. Now, coming back to this point, Swami Vivekananda, isn't it weird that he emphasized learning Sanskrit so much? Like he himself worked so hard to learn it, and he himself worked so hard to get his brother disciples to take it seriously. Like his leadership was like, do it, like learn Sanskrit, however hard it is, like do it, like take the time and do it, because everything depends on it. How will you understand your tradition, which is mostly in Sanskrit, if you don't know Sanskrit? You're always going to be vulnerable here. Like I only want to do one thing, and that's to find all the ways in which my tradition has made you vulnerable and address it, because this should give you strength. You know, I'm interested in a Luciferian Promethean project, as it were. I want to bring total autonomy back to the individual. And that means I want to deconstruct all the institutions, such as the priestly elite who will tell you what words mean. But why let them cast spells? Like, why not learn to spell? E, U. So, where are we? Okay, so Swamiji, weirdly enough, I think because he knew the brother disciples would teach. Maybe this is maybe more important for like teachers, but I think everyone needs to teach themselves. So like Swamiji, he emphasized it in his own life, then he emphasized it with his brother disciples, and they're kind of intellectually working to understand, and he made them read like historical works and stuff that develops the mind. And in his lectures, often you see a strong emphasis on physical health. Now, he had very bad health throughout his life. It's interesting, he had so much health problems. He's not like a yogi, you know, like even he made fun of that, like ideal even in Raja Yoga. He's like, trees live for a really long time. Longevity is not at all an indication of spirituality. Or there are some animals that never get sick. You know, like, is that an indication of spirituality? You know, obviously it's not, but it can be a good foundation. So these are all what Ayurveda is, what grammar is, all we can talk about it. But with Patanjali, it's important that he doesn't just teach yoga. And now, isn't it funny that in this country, many of us are looking at Patanjali Yoga Sutra. We're yogis, we call ourselves, we're studying yoga, but maybe when we look at Patanjali Yoga Sutra, we don't interact with it in the Sanskrit. And even when we do, we don't know what the words mean. And even when we do, it's the only part of Patanjali that we care about. But Patanjali had more to say than just that. And arguably, if you want to learn from Patanjali, he might actually insist that you have some Ayurveda and some grammar first. Then only he might. I don't know what the sequence would be like. Maybe he teaches you all the things at the same time. I don't know. But we at least know this. In the Dhyana mantra attributed to Patanjali, it was important to say that he taught Ayurveda, grammar, Vyakarana is the Sanskrit word for grammar. Vyakarana. It's a beautiful word actually. Even that we can break down. I'll resist. But Vyakarana, Vyakarana, Ayurveda, and yoga. And these three things remove human suffering. So if we think spirituality will solve all of our problems, we're fucked. Because most of our problems aren't there. Most of our problems are physical, psychological, and there's different sciences in our tradition for those things. So trying to make one thing apply to another thing is problematic. But it's what we try to do. So we should be honest here and say, like, I think the tradition doesn't mean for us to do that. And now the question is, like, it requires, the buy-in is so high, like, it's so expensive to buy into the tradition. Like you have to learn, it takes so much time to learn grammar and things like that. But it's worth it, I think, right? Doing things slowly, it's worth it. And so the question now is, how do you popularize a tradition when very few of us, like, have the time to pay the price that the tradition, to speak in economic terms here, it's like the buy-in is very high. Who has the time? Who has the space to buy in? Except people like Abhinavagupta who, like, are born in wealth. You know, it's like who. Some people don't have access to internet. I make claims that it's like you can access text. Well, it does actually, for many people, require working internet, which many people don't have. So it's a good thing that now more people have internet, or that more people have schools and that they're in their schools learning to read and write. There's a drawback to that, of course, but, like, it's also good that there's lingua franca, like English, or, like, back then Greek. These are all good things because it means we can popularize, we can mainstream. But you have to remember, what we're trying to do now is mainstreaming and popularizing a tradition that wasn't meant for everybody. It was meant for a very specific group of people who had a very specific way of speaking to one another. And so now the complexity is, how will we popularize a thing that was meant to be secret? And the reason it was meant to be secret is so that it can be sacred. Now, how do you cast your pearls here and there without people turning and rending ye? There's only one way. We're all swine. We have to stop being swine. We have to be divine. But how do you do that? You develop. No offense to swines. I think they're doing way better than us. But we have to develop physically and intellectually. You know, so I think we should take those things seriously. Now, coming to Sanskrit, Swamiji emphasized it, and Sri Ramakrishna seemed to not care about it. So it's like there's a tension there. Why is Swamiji putting so much emphasis on it? We say, because Sri Ramakrishna did too, it's just that's not what he made explicit. Like, arguably what Sri Ramakrishna is focusing on is the pure enthusiasm and love for God. These are all tools that are meant to support that. These are all means to an end. So I'll come back to the word Tantra. It refers to a text, and that text, by the way, is a means to an end. You know, so when you think of Patanjali, when you think of all the traditions in India, a lot of them are going to be in Sanskrit. And this is no less true of the Tantric tradition. And the Tantras are texts, and those texts are often written in Sanskrit. And those texts are usually about charya, about what to do, how to do it. But the only reason that you would want to do it is because you're interested in the goals. So therefore, when you study a text, you have to ask 4 questions. So they're very foundational. These are Anubandha Chatushtaya. Anubandha Chatushtaya. These are 4 things that you have to be clear about before you study a text. The first thing is, who is it for? Right? Is it? And the question is, like, the text will tell you. Like, say, Advaita Vedanta text will give you the Shat Sampati, what do you call it? Sadhana Chatushtaya. So you have Viveka, Vairagya, Sat Sampati, Mokshatvam. Like, it'll tell you what kind of person will benefit from this text. If you want that kind of person, it's probably not for you. So whatever. You know, there are other texts that are for you. So in selecting text, you have to ask the question, who is this text for, and am I that kind of person? But then there are also other questions like prayojana. What is the text for? That will help you answer the first question. Like, is the text for making money? If I'm not interested in making money, why would I study that text? Is this text for overcoming my, let's say, hang-ups around rules that I take too seriously? Then it's for me. But if I don't need that, in fact, if I need the rules, then it's not for me. But, like, to decide that, I have to understand the prayojana. The prayojana means, what's the text for? What's the goal of the text? What is it trying to teach? And notice the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it opens with, I am teaching this text in order to do Raja Yoga. So you learn Hatha Yoga to do Raja Yoga. If that's your goal, then you study the text. If it's not your goal, why do the text? Right? Like, so prayojana. Next thing is, like, it's called vastu, or content. Like, what's the text saying? And the important is sambandha. It's a very important thing we take for granted. The text has a goal, and the text has some content. But the link between the content and the goal must also be made explicit. The text should say, this is what I'm going to teach, this is what I want, and this is how what I'm going to teach is going to lead to what I want. And if this is for you, then I present it to you. So these are the 4 qualifications of Anubandha Chatushtaya. The 4-fold, how do you say, questions before you study a text. What does the text teach? What is the goal of learning it? What is the link between the contents of the text and the goal? And who is it for? And am I that person, you know? And if you're not, then you reject the text. Another question is, like, we want to put everything on the table without saying this is for you. You know, and so, like, all these texts are available in the tradition. So that with Sanskrit, like, some basic understanding of Sanskrit, it empowers you because now you can access text much more directly. And we can't deny that Tantra is mostly a textual tradition, a scriptural tradition. At least in the way that I use the word Tantra. Cool. So that's actually actually that's already quite a bit. Like that discussion, all of that is preamble to getting into the thing that I actually want to talk about. But it's important preamble, I hope. So where were we? We said some things about Sanskrit. Now coming back to the Tantra thing, it's like, if you want to play golf, there's a way to be in the golf court. If you want to play basketball, there's a different way to be. Now each Tantra is teaching this charya. And therefore different Tantras will have different ideas to how to conduct the ritual. But most of them are about rituals. So in a Tantra, like I'm speaking about the text now, the textual tradition, generally you'll find 4 things. Jnanapada, Yogapada, Kriyapada, and Charyapada. And so this you should, all the stuff that I'm saying now, like this you should know.
Yeah.
These are the intellectual frames. Anubandha, what is the 4 things you need to know before you study a text? Who is it for? What's in it? What's the goal? Who is it for? And what's the link? It is my expectation that you know the Sanskrit words for these things. You know, like it's more important to me that you understand like these things, but it's still important to me that you know the Sanskrit terms, especially you guys, because like a lot of you will be conveying this stuff, right? So when you say the 4 full things, in order to not get into a game of broken telephone, which is the sad fate of most traditions in the world, like almost all religions end up misrepresenting what their teachers taught because they weren't clear about like the terms, right? So we have terms and we should be technically precise. Anubandha Chatushtaya means the 4 things that you need to have before going into a study, going into a text. And they are vastu, what's in the text, prayojana, what the goal of the text is, sambandha or vastu prayojana sambandha. And by the way, these terms are not set in stone, like with the Sanskrit language, everything is so fluid, right? Vastu, prayojana, sambandha. Sambandha is a very good word to learn because it means link. Bandhu means friend, right? Bandha. Sambandha means friendship, means links, like sangha even means attachment. So, dusanga, satsanga, good attachment, bad attachment. You say satsang because they're still attachments, but they're good attachments, helpful attachments. Dusanga, a dusanga is any attachment that disempowers you. A satsanga is any attachment that empowers you. Attachment is not a problem. It's what you are attached to. That is why I say, how complex? Because we say, don't be attached. Dandapani Ji had a very funny joke, right? Somebody said, can monks have email? And he's like, yes, as long as there are no attachments. And it's like, yeah, like attachment. When Westerners appropriate Eastern philosophy, they usually do it by saying it's like no attachment, right? It's like, that's not what we're saying at all. We're very attached. We're just as attached as you guys are to your money, except for us, it's ideas. And we live them through their logic. We live those ideas through to their logical conclusion, even if that means total moral censure, because they're in our texts, and we care about our texts. And I have texts that teach me to do certain things that I do. And they're for me, but they might not be for others. And that's, again, something that we get from learning Sanskrit, because the Sanskrit language will show you that words mean many things. And the way that they link to each other can be complex and fluid and inclusive and rich and wonderful. So coming back to this. Anubandha Chatushtaya, if like one model we can learn from this would be this. Before we study a text, we should have the sense of what the text is teaching, vastu. And by the way, most Sanskrit literature, especially in like the spiritual field, actually I would argue almost all Sanskrit literature, whether it's like an art book like the Natya Shastra or something, or like even a book on mathematics or astronomy, or even a book on like sex, like the Kama Sutra, it's in Sanskrit, and therefore being part of the Sanskrit literary tradition, whether it's about spirituality or not, it's going to in the beginning tell you what the text is about. It'll give you like an abstract, like in the academic world, it's like before you read the paper, which is like 38 pages or 400 pages or some shit, like you have to decide whether or not the contents of the paper is going to be relevant to you and to your study or not. So think of it as an abstract. Vastu just means stuff, means content, abstract. Like an Instagram bio or something for the text. Should I DM her? Let me look at the bio. It's like that. Yeah, and you know what my bio is? It says Jaima Kali with a drop of blood. It should tell you everything. That's like the only disclaimer that you need. You know? Yeah, so it's the bio. Like, what's the abstract? And so the text might start with something that says, this text is Atta Yoga Anushasanam. This is going to teach you yoga. Now, what is yoga? Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. Defining what yoga is, it's like the cessation of the mind. And if you read that, you're like, nah, not for me. It's not for you. The next thing is Tara Drashtu Sarupe Avasthanam. This is the prayojana. See, in the Yoga Sutra, Atta Yoga Anushasanam, the Vastu is yoga, right? But what is yoga? Now it's defined. It's called Lakshana. There's another word you should know. Lakshana means definition. There are 2 types of Lakshana. Swarupa Lakshana and Tatastha Lakshana. In English, again, these are hard to translate, but Swarupa means inherent. So heat is an inherent property of fire. You never have fire that's not hot, arguably. I don't know that there's fire that's not hot, but like by fire we mean a hot thing, or like heat is always there in fire. Fire is not always there in heat, but heat is always there in fire. Right? Like so, heat is an inherent property of fire. Swarupa lakshana. So the definition of fire is that thing that's hot, and you can't have fire without that. But you can also say like, what is fire? Oh, it's that thing inside the candle. Does the fire need the candle? No, but pointing to the candle is an indirect way of pointing to the fire. So there are these indirect definitions. Aristotle calls them accidentals. So who is Nishant? The guy wearing black. So that's called tatastha lakshana. We're defining Nishant based on a peripheral and indirect property. I tend to only wear black these days, but that wasn't always true. I used to like to only wear red, and there was a time when I would wear whatever. It just depended on what sadhana I was doing at what time in my life. So in this time in my life, I'm doing a particular sadhana, which I always wear black, right? It's like, but that's not integral to my being. I could not wear black, and I could still be this psychological being called Nishant. So if you say, who is Nishant? And if your answer is, oh, the guy in black. Actually, that could also be Johnny Cash. See, that's why Tatastha Lakshana doesn't really work, because it's too broad. But it's helpful in that moment. Like, which, like the famous Indian example, which thing is your house? That place, the house with the bird on it. The house doesn't always have the bird on it, but in this moment, defining the house in relation to the bird is helpful. So a lot of the way that we use language is in this way, indirectly. So do not confuse the finger pointing to the moon and the moon. You guys, that statement goes, it's much more when you understand that that's the Lakshana and Swarupa Lakshana. The Buddha is making arguably the Buddha, but the interpreter or the Buddha is making a very complex logical point about Swarupa and Tatastha Lakshana. And how, you see, there's deeper connotations behind statements that resonate, even in like a bumper sticker kind of way.
Yeah.
So the finger pointing at the moon is still valuable, but it's not integral. It's called Tatastha Lakshana. Swarupa Lakshana is very hard. And there are entire books, like thousands of verses devoted to Swarupa Lakshana. Even Aristotle is engaging in the project of trying to define a human, which he does through his taxonomy. And he says, oh, we're just featherless bipeds who think. That's important. Knowing what you are is important, because if you don't know what you are, you don't know what it will take to be happy. So the reason Aristotle, I would argue, the reason he defines us as featherless bipeds who like to think is because his concept of eudaimonia is the contemplative life. And so in Nicomachean Ethics, he's asking, like, what would it take for a human to be fulfilled? This guy defended slavery too, so don't forget. But he's a very great thinker. Even great thinkers have weird thoughts sometimes. Who are we to judge? Let's at least people are upset at Aristotle for defending slavery, but they don't read Aristotle. You know what I'm saying? But if you read Nicomachean Ethics, it's quite clear that, and again, disclaimer, I haven't read it in Greek, but it seems like why he's defining the human is important. And I think it has something to do with his articulation of eudaimonia, which is the real goal of ethics. Like in Nicomachean Ethics, he's asking, like, what would it take to be happy? It's an axiological project, right? And so what would it take to be happy? And he's saying that, well, before I can even answer that question, I have to know what I am. What is a human? And what it takes for a human to be happy might be different from what it takes for a bird to be happy. And what it takes for Nishant to be happy might be very different from what it takes for you to be happy. And as Americans, you should understand that above all, that everyone is allowed the pursuit of happiness, each in their own individual way. I think that's the best thing about this country. Swamiji loved it because it's truly Hindu. The concept that everyone should articulate their happiness in their own way, and they should never inflict it on anyone else. And then you have the whole like John Stuart Mill's conversation about like third party harm. Like what if I'm Dexter? Kind of funny. Like Nicola Devi and I are sitting at the dhuni. It starts to rain, but the dhuni doesn't go out. So we're like, all right, and we just keep going, and we're just like in this like wonderful moment after 2 nights of Shivaratri, and then like, did you watch Dexter? I mean, I get in a very complex discussion about when you. I'd never seen the show, but like when you have a desire that is actually like the kind of desire that takes away another person's ability to express. Like, third-party harm is a conversation you have to have when you argue for the pursuit of happiness. But what if your pursuit of happiness comes at the expense of someone else's ability to pursue happiness? That's the whole ethical dilemma. But notice, the reason why we have that dilemma is because ethics is really just about finding a way to be happy. And the thing is, most of us do things that harm others to get things that don't even make us happy, because we don't know what the fuck we are. So we think money makes us happy. We do a bunch of immoral shit and kill a bunch of people and get that money, and then we're not even happy. What the fuck? You built your railroads. My grandfathers built it for you so you could get spices, and the only ones you ever use is pumpkin spice. I don't even know that we got. You didn't even get that from us. So money sucks. Money sucks. It won't make you happy. Fuck it. But none of this is possible without money. But whose goal is money? Like money's not the point, right? It's a means. You say but for some people it's a point. So, but again, money's not bad. Look at this. How do we have this house? How do we have this land? Like, it's like money buys it, but who cares about money? You know what I mean? It's like there's something delicate happening here. So we say money is not spiritual. People think Christ is saying money is evil. He's not. Love of money is evil. It's attachment. But attachment is also good. But it's satsang versus dusanga. You know, so there's all these like subtleties in the way that we use words and the flattening that happens when we use single words that have many words. So coming to lakshana, now the word lakshana means definition. And there are two kinds of definitions, tatastha lakshana and swarupa lakshana. So God's play is a swarupa lakshana, not a tatastha lakshana, which is very important when defining theologically what Shiva is. Is Shiva the kind of being who plays? And we say yes, integrally, what it means to be Shiva is to be playful. And now this is where Sanskrit grammar comes in. Because in Sanskrit, if you take a word, never mind how the word fits with other words, that word has a root called dhatu. So every word has a root, and that root is multivalent. This is the most important thing, multivalency, meaning the root of the word. One very old word is yoga, actually. There's some ancient dhatus that are in the Vedic times, even before like the grammar reform of Panini. So the dhatu for yoga, yuk or yuj, right? Yuj, that dhatu, the root, has many different meanings. You know what? It's the same as the English word use. The English word use is linked to the yuj. Is that so cool? Yuj and use. Yeah, but like that dhatu means like tool, means, right? Like some method, some way, basically something useful. Yoga means a useful thing. It doesn't just mean union, it means useful thing, but it can also mean union. So like the thing about the word yoga is you can break down the word to the dhatu, and when you look at the dhatu, there are further ways to break down the dhatu into like sound symbols, but the dhatu is so rich with meaning. It's so rich with meaning, such that the word deva or devi is usually you break it down to div. Div has at least 6 meanings, and one of them is krida. Now, in the tantric like kaula world, that one is more important to us than just light. God is playful. I was saying this yesterday, but we have a theology of a playful, artistic God, not a just father, a rational and moral father. That's valid. It's totally valid. It's just not a book I'm interested in reading. You know, I like a different book, and both books are good. All of this is an asset to the Bhagavad Gita point that I was trying to make an hour ago, which I still intend to make. And all of this conversation is actually me continuing the one that I had yesterday. And people are like, oh my God, he's meandering. Stay with me and you will fucking see that it will all fit together because I'm keeping tabs. And so should you, because it's not that hard if you take the time to develop this sword. You know, fence with me. Don't knife fight me in an alley. I will lose that fight because I don't know how to fight with knives in an alley. I didn't grow up in a culture that taught me to stab in the alley. I'm fencing. Maybe that's my disadvantage. But let's fence. And so we'll keep tabs of all these ideas, right? Like, overarching idea here is, what is Shiva? What is Tantra? And what makes Shaivism different from other traditions? And I think the theology of a playful God, notice it's rooted in a kind of understanding of grammar, of vocabulary, the way you can break down the word deva, which means God. You can break that down to mean div, and one of the 6 or 7 different dhatus is krida, playful. And then focusing on that dhatu gives us a whole different theology. Isn't that crazy? Like the theologies of Tantra around what we think God is ultimately come down to the Swarupa Lakshana versus Tatastha Lakshana definition. Comes down to things like dhatus and which dhatu we're expressing, and being able to say, okay, this dhatu is important to me, is important because then I can define and clarify my position and also articulate it as different from another position. But if I'm not able to do that, the conflation occurs, and then we get into this place where we mean different things by the same word. And we don't have to. We can define the term. And Sanskrit and grammar is all about that. So coming back to the story of the Gita, it's like already we have so much complexity when it comes to the word. Now, words become sentences, which become books. And those books then become representative of traditions. So if Tantra is a textual tradition, if it's a scriptural movement within India, the first thing to recognize about this movement is that it's not a one-book movement. And I learned this lesson, interestingly, with the Bhagavad Gita. So I'm 14. Haha, didn't think I would come back to that story, did you? There are sentences that I said yesterday that you think I forgot about. I'm going to just wait. Just give me some time. I just need time.
20 tabs open.
Like we've had 9,000 years as a culture to think about this stuff. Give me 9 hours, you guys. At the very least, like it doesn't have to be all at once. but also I don't care about money, so I'm not like trying to charge you for the hour, you know. So I can sit here for 9 hours and drink chai, or Celsius, where the fuck this is. I can sit here and drink chai for 9 hours and talk about this stuff because I've got at least 9,000 years of shit to catch you up on, you know. But here's the thing: it's like the text, the Bhagavad Gita, is in the modern world considered to be the text of Hinduism. Just see how absolutely callous that is, because that's reading the entire Indian world through the Abrahamic one book lens. What is a Christian? A Christian is a person who believes in the Bible. My ass. Most of them don't read the Bible, and most of them focus on different books in the Bible. I mean, the 4 Gospels are interesting because there are allegedly other Gospels. This is anachronistic to say, but Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Thomas. But we don't consider those Gospels because they are kind of far afield of what these 4 Gospels have to say about Christ. But even between those 4 Gospels, there are discrepancies, right? And I love like Cynthia Bourgeau's work around this, where she's trying to understand who Mary is, and she's like looking at these 4 Gospels, and she's like, what Luke has to say about the woman who Christ exorcises, and what this maybe Mark has to say about this woman, and what Matthew has to say about like Lazarus. Like they conflate it, but if you look closely, you'll see that they actually have different stories. Like each Gospel is like a different thing and focuses on a different aspect almost subtly. Like Luke is more of like a healing Gospel.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting, right? Like the 4 Gospels are 4 different stories about this guy. And there's all these anachronisms, like John's Gospel is like 150 years after Christ, or like Paul never actually met the Christ. Again, I don't even get into that debate. But it's interesting, as Cynthia Bourgeau points out in this beautiful book, The Meaning of Mary Magdalene, she looks at the Gospels. This is where I learned that. And by the way, everything I'm going to convey, I learned from someplace, right? And so let's just go to that place. In this book, Cynthia Bourgeau is saying, look at the Gospels, they're different, there are slight differences, but they're not so different that you have to kick them out. So these 4 can be. But the Gospel of Thomas, that doesn't like fit the narrative. You know, so there's a book, and that book is actually many books. So the Bible is not a book, it's many books. But we usually think of Christianity as that religion which is represented by the book called the Bible. And it's different from the Judaic tradition, which has the first 5, right? Like, doesn't consider the New Testament because it's like about this guy that they don't consider as a prophet.
Right.
So like, Christians are Jews who have a prophet not shared by other Jews. And so their book is an expansion of a previous book. And the things that have expanded for the Christians are non-canonical for the traditional Judaic person. Right? Is that fair? And then the Islamic people will add extra books. They'll say, what Isa taught was not wrong. It's kind of cool, right? Like the Islamic world is inclusivist. It's like what Isa taught was not wrong. In fact, what Moses taught and what Abraham taught was not wrong. And so the Prophet Muhammad, the messenger, who is no longer the son of God, because in one sense, they're redefining what it means to be a prophet. Christ is the prophet in that he is God. Muhammad is not a prophet in that he is God. Muhammad is a prophet in that he speaks for God. Not as God, but for God. He's God's messenger. Now, most of what we think of Islam is filtered through like this like CNN view of the terrorist and Islamic fundamentalism and whatnot. But it's incredibly beautiful, incredibly elegant. And their theologies are so refined. And I've learned so much just from like a non-Arabic outsider inquiry into Islam. You know, oh my God, it's like fencing when it comes to some Abrahamic concepts. And you really see the influence of modernity. Like this is a modern Abrahamic movement, do you know? With real modern implications in law. Like Christ is like legally commenting on a law, right? Like Hammurabi hammers into a stone tablet that if somebody takes your eye, you should take their eye. An eye for an eye. Like this is justice. Like, and Christ is saying, nah, that's not justice. Turn the other cheek. If somebody's mean to you, don't be mean back. Like it's weird. He's reinterpreting the law, and if you take him seriously, you might actually change your laws to reflect what he's saying. You might move towards more rehabilitative, restorative justice as opposed to a punitive justice. Like I will feel I'll feel compensated if my aggressor suffers the same aggression as they inflicted on me. Maybe that's not true.
There are Jewish thinkers who define that exact thing as the eye for an eye is the maximum that you can inflict.
Right.
If somebody is harmed,
exactly.
you cannot harm them in addition to...
Exactly, right. So this whole like, logic around...
Factor.
Yeah, right. It's a limiting. It's not violence. Actually, it's inhibiting violence. It's like I'm angry. I want to fight. Well, my code says, okay, be proportional. right? And Christian thinkers like Saint Thomas Aquinas, and again, like, shouldn't you be interested in texts like Summa Theologica? If you're going to think about Christian God, we have to do Christian theology, and there are great masters like Aquinas who will use these Jewish ideas like proportionality, like in articulating a just war, which is important for a tradition that's expanding and is converting and colonizing. Like we speak of it as if it's evil. It's not. They actually genuinely feel like they have the truth, and then they feel like if they don't give you the truth, that's evil. And if they have to force it down your throat, like a good parent, they will. That's to their credit. I'm happy that people are willing to live and die for something they consider to be true. That's beautiful. Not only are they willing to live and die for something that's true, they're willing to kill for something that's true. I absolve all tyrants and oppressors and colonizers. I'm not different from them. We're all the same. And they're good, deeply good, because all they did was fight and die and kill for what they believed in. Like all of us. Only maybe they did it on a scale other, like, our problem is not with what they did, it's with the power through which they did it. We just hate Shakti, and we hate to see it in any context. And so there was Shakti. These people had Shakti, like Prophet Muhammad. I mean, like, how do you take a city, draft a constitution, and within a few short years create an entire empire? Like, that's awesome that he did that. I know. But here's the thing. Like, to do that, though, requires that you might engage with communities in a violent way. And you don't want to do that. Ideally, you would just tell them your book, and they would realize how superior this truth was, and abandon all their idols and join up. And then you would have a new place to tax. But they don't do that. You go to them and you show them your book, and they're like, cool, but whatever. And then you're like, the child won't take the medicine. Now let's put them in concentration camps or something like that, right? Like California and like the project. It's very important to note that good intentions maybe, and I think the empire can play upon those intentions. Like the empire might be like, hey, like, you actually want to help people. Here's how you can help people. Go and bring the book to them. And then look, they're not receiving the book. Okay, let's use force. It's our responsibility to. I think that's there's something beautiful to that also, something poetic to that.
Even in the cases of religions that actually prohibit the use of force in that way, and some of them probably would have been more mainstream had they been willing to take that step. The one that comes to mind is the Baha'i.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Is beautiful, but
they
have a very strict non-violence requirement.
They can't survive in an Abrahamic context as an Abrahamic tradition if they're not willing to also play that game, because they're not going to, so they're relatively a niche movement within a kind of maybe. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like the Islamic empire, the Christian empire, they're like fighting over the Jewish empire. Like they're all kind of like debating each other, like as to theological points and canonical versus non-canonical. But a lot of that debate plays itself out in the political arena for various reasons. I'm not judging that. I'm just saying, like, it's important for Aquinas to consider what war looks like, because in the Abrahamic world, war is a very important tool for religion. That's why people have a bad taste of religion. So when we bring Hinduism here to America, it gets dangerous because it becomes warlike. In India, we don't really kill each other over religion, but we more or less do. But we don't fight. I mean, like, it's a historical fact, I think, that before the Mughal invasion, religion was not used as a reason to kill others. Exclude them, maybe. Never talk to them, maybe. Never look at them, maybe. Never share food with them or be in the same space with them, maybe. But not kill them. But you, again, don't get the impression that Indians kill each other. They kill each other as much as anybody else kill each other. But usually over land and money, and religion in India has often been disambiguated from those things. That's why Tantra is so dangerous in the Indian context, because it kind of brings the world and God together, which is dangerous. And that's what Islam does kind of well too, because it argues that the world is not... Islam has kind of tantric sort of things in it, which is cool, but it's still a theistic, dualistic, devotional religion that is very much like Christianity, except it considers the prophet in a different way. Same word, different idea. An angel is a messenger of God. Like, what is it? Islamic angel versus Christian angel? Different. Biblically accurate angel versus like there's so many ways in which we use our words that we ought to think about, like we can be sensitive around. So coming back to this like Islamic thing, so many things in there are so beautiful and elegant and whatnot, but we can't really interact with those ideas because they're harder for us to access in the West, when those words are mostly in Arabic, and they're behind a smoke screen of media that tell us that like there's inherent violence in that religion or whatever, and there are ways to interpret the word jihad which lead you to one conclusion over the other, and like so many things. But having said all that, Swamiji had a point. He said India is very socially conservative, very religiously liberal. America is very socially liberal, very religiously conservative, which is fine. It's just something to observe about psychology, Never have I been made aware of cultural differences more than in recent years. And it's my fault. Like, I'm just assuming that everybody's the same as me, which is violent. I know we all think differently. So the first thing we have to do now is have ground kind of fundamental first principles sort of conversations. And so lakshana is important. Lakshana means definition, swarupa lakshana and tatastha lakshana. Like, what definition is integral to the thing that I'm trying to talk about, and what definition is peripheral and incidental. I think the word incidental is better than accidental. Like upadhi. Upadhi is a tatastha lakshana. What are you? This body, this mind? No. Those are accidental and incidental. The body and mind are my experience. They're not me. I am the experiencer. So the tatastha lakshana here is body and mind. I am defined only incidentally by the body and mind. But if I look at what I really am, I am this drashta, the seer. In the Yoga Sutra, tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. Who would be interested in this text? The one who wants to realize who they truly are, swarupa. You know? And how do they do that? Through learning yoga. Because yoga is the complete cessation of the mind. Tada, then one realizes who they truly are. So notice the whole Yoga Sutra opens with this conversation of, who is this text for? Well, a person who wants to realize who they are. What is this text about? Realizing what you are. And thirdly, like, how will you do that? Through yoga. The text teaches yoga. You know, there's the vastu, the prayojana, and the sambandha, and the fourth thing is adhikari. Adhikari, we often translate it as competency, but I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think adhikari can mean, not to get into the grammar here, or not grammar, but what do you call it, like the etymology, not to get into etymologies, but the word adhikari means like, who would be interested in this? Not who is qualified for it. I think that's the wrong way of thinking. But again, who is qualified for it is just who is interested in it. Interest and sincerity alone matters in this context. So the person interested in realizing who they are and who can be convinced that the cessation of the mind is what it's going to take to realize who they are will be interested in learning this text, which is about yoga. So the good thing is, whether it's a Kama Sutra or about wealth or whether it's about like some spiritual thing, usually in the Sanskrit literary tradition, the first few verses are going to be about this Anubandha Chatushtaya. Adhikari, who is the text for? Vastu, what is in the text? Prayojana, what is the goal of the text? And Sambandha, what is the link between the Vastu and the Prayojana, the content and the goal? And so all of these, again, there's no order. They might all be in one verse, or they might be spread over the course of several verses. But before we do Tantra, we should first remember that Tantra is a scriptural tradition. And so choosing a text is important, but before we study the text, we have to ask these questions. What's in it? What's the goal? Who are we? And do we even want to fucking play golf? So, okay, so much for now. Like Anubandha, Lakshana definitions, Anubandha, Chatushtaya, the text. Now coming to the question of what is Tantra. So I got this Gita. I was fortunate, I'm in the ashram. I get this Gita. And then I come home to my grandfather. I remember I was excited to share with him, who was my main teacher. I found new texts. I'm excited to share with him the new text that I'm reading. And the way we work with text, we want to read them cover to cover. We're living them. We're memorizing the verses. We're chanting the verses. We're looking at all these grammar and etymological things. So I was excited to get into this new world called the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, I had read the Amar Jitaka. I know the Mahabharata. Like I know Ramayana. Like I had read these comics growing up. It's part of the Hindu world, right? But the Gita and the serious study of the Gita is something new to me. And at age 14 or 15, like that's when I started to do that, like in my own way. And I want to share it with my grandfather. So I went to him and I showed him the Gita. And I, at that time, was excited about the Gita because I believed it to be the quintessential text, the way the Bible is to the Christians and the way the Quran is to the Muslims. But even in the Quran, there's a hadith tradition, you know. And the hadith tradition means like a commentarial tradition on the Quran. There are many different ways of interpreting the Quran. Similarly, there are many different ways of interpreting the Gita. And many people have paid a lot of attention to the Gita, like Ramanuja, like Madhava, like Shankara. These are huge names in India because they're these, how you call them, like acharyas, like these acharyas, they're teachers, but they're also systematizers, they're world builders, they're founders of traditions. And all of them were Brahmins speaking within a Vedic context, a Vedantic context. And that is the context that is most popularly represented by Hinduism, but it is not the context of my family. That's what I didn't really understand that. Like, it's interesting. I grew up in a Śaiva Śākta household in which I was still buying into the notion that what it meant to be Hindu was to be Vedic or Brahmin or something. Like, I don't know, there was a world that I thought was our world. But then I brought the Gita to my grandfather. And I was like, I'm studying this. And I was like proud to share with him. And he was like, that's cute. It's more of a Vaishnava book though. It was so cute. And I was like, I was mad. I was like, you're just saying that because it's Shri Krishna. I'm like, this is your bigotry. You think Shri Krishna is saying this, therefore you call it a Vaishnava book? My grandfather was a man of very few words. Very silent, He didn't really press the point. He was always excited about, like, he encouraged me to learn it, but he dismissed it. He wasn't like, oh, it's a great book and you're right, it's the one book that defines Hinduism. It was more like, cute,
Yeah.
It didn't mean anything to him. And now I'm understanding why. In the Gita, we get claims like anityam, masukam, lokam. This world is unhappy because it's temporal. We tantrics, especially in the Śaiva Śākta world, don't consider dynamism or temporality to necessarily indicate illusion or suffering. There's a huge difference. The Vaidika, and I don't want to say Tantra is Vaidika, I don't want to say it's Aryan or Dravidian. Remember the conversation we were having yesterday? Haha, I didn't think I'll come back to that. Did you? Okay. The whole Aryan, Dravidian thing, the whole like, when you zoom out of chaos, you see order. If you look at the order of the world right now, you'll see chaos. Anyway, so it's so important to point this out though, that like the Gita was nothing to my grandfather. He didn't care about it. It's like, cool. He was interested in the Tirumantiram, Tirumular's work. He was interested in Tirumurai. He was mostly like engaging with a Tamil tradition even, like a Tamil Śaiva Siddhanta tradition. The Gita didn't really fit in that world. It's a great text, no doubt. It's awesome, but I don't really quote it very much. Notice it's not a very big part of it. And people are like, aren't you a Hindu teacher? Yeah, but notice by Hinduism, we're not talking about a single book culture. So just notice what happens, the flattening here in the Abrahamic world, because each empire is defined by its book, and it's a big project to not only create a book, but then to imperially stamp that book as canon. We then project that view onto India, and we say, every Indian who is Hindu is just like every African is an Igbo person. It's like, no, we have to be careful. We're dealing with a very rich world, and when we come to the word Tantra, we're talking about not one book, but so many different books that are, like I was saying yesterday, dazzling in their diversity. But they're almost all of them styled as a Tantra because they're almost all of them attributed to Lord Shiva. Some of them are Parvati or Shakti teaching. There's the Agama, Nigama distinction, I'm not going to get into that. But in some text, in the more radical Shakta text, Shiva is learning from Shakti. But usually the text is like, we just did the Kali Sahasranam, it opens with the goddess asking a question. Or somebody asks a question, Parashurama, right, like reveals it or whatever. And somebody asks a question, usually it's Parvati, and then somebody gives an answer, and usually the answer is given by Shiva. But then, if a Tantra is a text that Shiva reveals, the very important question is, why do they all say different things? That's what is difficult about Tantra. It's like, when we get the Sanskrit to be able to interact with the primary sources, we go to the primary sources like the Malini Vijayotara Tantra, and then we look at Raudava Agama or something. We look at these two texts and we see that they're conflicting, contradictory. One text says, like say, Tirumantiram in its first chapter will tell you never drink wine. Another text will say, Kali should be worshipped with wine. What will you do? Both are Tantras. So now you have to make, like I was saying yesterday, a very difficult choice as to how you use the word Tantra. So the systematizers like Abhinava Gupta and others say that there's a range of text, and there are 92 major texts, arguably, and they can be divided into these three categories. The first category are the dualistic Tantras, second category are the qualified non-dualistic Tantras, and the third category are the non-dualistic Tantras. And these are called the Śaiva Agamas, Raudra Agamas, and the Bhairava Agamas, respectively. Oh. Yes. Can you text Soundbavi? She just called me, but I'm in class, so. I mean, does anybody, can it? Yeah, Kulesh is not doing it. So just ask her what's up. So now, So now, this is important to note that like the tantric world attempts to understand it in full, like systematize the full thing, and this is the best that we got. Like this category of 92 or something tantras that can be broken down into three types of tantra. So tantra is either a Śaiva Agama, a Raudra Agama, or a Bhairava Agama. In other words, it either represents a dualistic view, a non-dualistic view, or a qualified non-dualistic view. It's a terrible thing to admit this, but this doesn't work. Because even if you look at the Bhairava Agamas, not only are there different ideas as to what constitutes the list of 64 in Bengal, the 64 in Bengal are different from the 64 in Kashmir. And the 64 like Nayanar kind of discussion, Siddhars, the Tamil tradition also uses 64, but it's weird because it's usually dualistic Śaiva Siddhantins working with 28 agamas that refer to the number 64. The whole thing is really complicated, but even those 64, if you like say, okay, take a list from say Kashmir, Malini Vijayotara Tantra, if you look at that, it looks pretty dualistic. So if you go to the primary source and you're like, wait, I was told by the secondary source, by the exegetical writer, I was told that this is a Bhairava Agama, and I look at it and I realize that like, I don't get the non-dual flavor here. Is that interesting? So like, that's the complicated thing. It's like we want it to be dual, qualified non-dual, and non-dual. But that's probably because of the influence of like say Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhava. These are like the big masters whose traditions are most popular in India. Shankara taught non-duality, Kevala Advaita it's called. And Ramanuja taught qualified non-duality, and Madhava taught duality, and these three are very big. And so in India you can think almost like there are three types of religion: non-dual religion, qualified non-dual religion, and dualistic religion. And they're all valid, but they're all different. They have a different way of like reading the person and the person's relationship to God, and a different way of reading God's relationship to the person's relationship to the world. Like these three things, Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara, person, world, and God. These are all very like up for grabs terms, and different people are different. So anyway, I think the tantric world might be responding to that. It might be saying like, oh, like we can just apply that to the tantras and say that tantras can be divided. So if you are a dualist, you will reject the 64 Bhairava Agamas. So if you are in Śaiva Siddhanta, you really are in Śaiva Siddhanta, you say these are the 28 texts that are like, Śaiva Agamas and Raudra Agamas. These are what our traditions are founded on. The other Agamas that talk about Shakti and like worship and this like, kind of crazy, like no, fuck it, it's not real. And then flip that and say the Bhairava Agamas, they might accept the Śaiva Agamas and the Raudra Agamas, but they might argue that they're a lower revelation. That Advaita is a higher revelation. That it's higher and truer to say Shivoham. Like that's fair, because Bhairava Agamas arguably teach a higher teaching. Hey Samavi, Jaima. Jaima. Police Adam. Chakra Sadham, oh my god, the Pongal, Jaima. There's nothing like breaking the Shivaratri fast with like Police Adam.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Can we have more of that Police Adam actually? I think it's a good stopping point, but I just wanted to say this, like, in defining Tantra, we have to remember that most Tantras are in Sanskrit. The Tantras are a vast array of texts, like a huge plethora of texts. And even when we try to systematize them into these neat categories, it doesn't work because we cannot agree upon what text constitute those categories. Like 64, what qualify, like even that's up for grabs. But even if we could, the texts themselves can be interpreted in many ways. Therefore, we have to understand this idea of primary and secondary source. In the Tantric world, the primary source, the Tantra, is attributed to Lord Shiva. Like Lord Shiva reveals the Tantra. We have certain ambiguous cases like the Shiva Sutra, not to be confused with the Maheshvara Sutra, which I was referencing earlier. The Panini, Ashtadhyayi, 14 verses. He's learning grammar from Shiva, playing the Damaru. Like, not to be conflated with that Maheshvara Sutra. The Shiva Sutra is attributed to Vasugupta in Kashmir. But Vasugupta is having a vision of Shiva. So when he teaches Shaiva non-duality in the Shiva Sutra, and the opening claim in the Shiva Sutra is Chaitanyam Atma. Consciousness is the self. In other words, consciousness is Shiva, and Chaitanyam, as Viranatha pointed out earlier, very complex word. Chaitanyam. Does it come with milk and sugar or not? Like it is. So it's a complex word. What do we mean by consciousness? All these things. But it means God. If we define it to mean God, then if I say I am God, that's very different from what the Raudava Agama is saying. Most of the Shaiva world does not think this. Most of the Shaiva world is pretty close to Christianity in some ways, and I'll point that out eventually, how it is. There's so many things about the Shaiva Siddhanta world, like the concept of mala, that comes very close to the Christian concept of original sin. There's also very interesting ways in which the Shaiva Siddhanta world, in its dualistic devotional way, can match up with Christianity actually. It's a really remarkable thing, but I won't get into it now. But I don't think most Shaivas would say I'm Shiva. But Shankara is not even, arguably Shankara is making a very different point. But he says Shivoham, Shivoham. And what Abhinavagupta means by Shivoham is different from what Shankara means by Shivoham, because they have different ideas as to what the word Shiva means. Exactly. It's interesting. But Vasugupta's Shiva Sutra opens with Chaitanyam Atma. And it's, again, not Chaitanyam Sahita, not Chaitanyam Cha, it's Chaitanyam Atma. Do you see how our conversation about sugar and milk, because it was about Sanskrit grammar, will help us here? Why is Chaitanyam Atma a compound? And which is the describing word? Which is the adjective? And which? This is the debate. People debate as to which is describing which. Is self describing consciousness? Is consciousness describing self? Which is the predicate? Huh?
I want this.
Yeah.
I want this knowledge.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a vidya, right? You like become hungry for it. But it's deep. It's so deep. You said the gambira, the depth of it. You know, a good practice is when we walk around the house and you were like, just ask me for what words are in Sanskrit. It's fun. Like you asked today, what's the word for milk? Now you know the word for milk. It's like fun because like you're developing your vocabulary, right? But it's helpful because by developing your vocabulary, you eventually start developing vyakarana, grammar. But coming back to all this like Chaitanya Mahatma stuff, Vasugupta's Shiva Sutra is considered a tantra because by tantra we mean the revelation of Lord Shiva that usually comes in the form of a text or some orally transmitted teaching. Jai Ma. Jai Ma.
It's hot.
Jai Ma. This is so important that the Vasugupta Shiva Sutra is itself a testament to the liminality and complexity of representing Tantra. Because it is in one sense considered a Tantra because he received it in a dream. So Vasugupta is a prophet, but he's decentered in the narrative. Shiva reveals the Shiva Sutras, hence they are called the Shiva Sutras. But notice the strategy here. By calling them the Shiva Sutras, you're saying this is what Shiva says. The problem is it's a minority in the Shaiva world because Shiva is not saying that in the Raudava Agamas.
Okay.
He does not say what he says in the Shiva Sutra allegedly. So those Shaiva Agamas that are represented by the dualistic tradition or that represent the dualistic tradition won't accept the Shiva Sutra. But by calling it the Shiva Sutra, you're almost trying to co-opt non-dual, like Shaivism through non-duality. So nowadays, when we think of Shaivism, we think of non-duality. But that's only because you're in America. It's very important to know that most Indians who are Shaivas are not non-dualist. Even if they sometimes flirt with non-duality. And by the way, I haven't even defined in this talk non-duality, qualified non-duality, like this whole other thing there. But because we've been doing it for the last 5 years, I'm just going to presuppose that. Although it is a first principles talk. Those are first principles too. What is a non-dual tradition? And we'll get into that. But I just want to say this, that in the world of Tantra, if the Tantra means a text, there are a lot of different texts. And the texts are usually called Tantras because they're attributed to the direct revelation of Lord Shiva. That's clear, right? A Tantra, by definition, is that revelation of Lord Shiva. Panchavaktarebhya agamat. There's a verse that I'm forgetting now that defines the Tantra as that which is revealed by Lord Shiva. Usually it comes to us in an oral form and most often a written form. Who then wrote it down? Who then spoke it into existence? We say sometimes Shiva comes as Dakshinamurti. Like Shiva literally came to a temple and gave vidya to a particular minister who then becomes Manakavasahar. Like Shiva literally puts a book at the base of an altar in a particular town and this person discovers it, and this saint is the one who wrote the text, but technically he discovered the text like this whole. So with Vasugupta, he's a saint. He's like meditating and he has vision of Shiva in a dream, and Shiva reveals to him these sutras which start with Chaitanya Mahatma, the self is God. But then Vasugupta, he's skeptical and he asks Shiva in the dream, how do I know this is real? Which is a question that only Indian epistemology dares to ask. The whole thing is exciting with him, like this is distinctly Hindu, to question everything and to use logic and use the sword to make sure that what you have is real. So Vasugupta is like, how do I know this is real? And Shiva gives him a very Karl Popperian falsification thing. He's like, go to this rock. It's called Mount Mahadeva. It's still there. Go to this rock and look and you'll see these inscribed on the rock. And Vasugupta allegedly does this. He sees confirmation for what he saw in the dream, and then he gives the teaching. Now we finally have a guy to link a tantra to. But the guy is revealing the tantra from Shiva. So now I think Vasugupta is a great case study in how the history of Tantra might have developed. I am willing to believe that Lord Shiva himself taught the Tantras to Durvasas. Like, there's a myth, or I should say myth, a very modern way of thinking, but there's a narrative. And even Abhinavagupta and Somana and various other Utpaladeva, they all champion this narrative that Lord Shiva was moved by compassion for the suffering of humanity, so he appears as an avatara called Srinatha or something. Oh, is it Shrikanta? Sorry, is it Shrikanta or Srinatha? Wait, he comes as an avatara. See, the reason I forget this stuff is because this is not that important to me. Like this legend of how we got the Tantras, it's not that important to me. For others, it's so important. They're like, what? You called Shrikanta Srinatha? Dude, I couldn't care less, bro. Dakshinamurti, Shrikanta, Srinatha. The point is, there is reality. That reality is a person called God, and that God felt compassion for humans, which frankly I don't get because it's not God's fault anyway that we're fucked. So I don't love you more just because you're good to me. You're the one that put me in this situation. So you better be fucking good to me. Anyway, so I'm your son, I'm your problem. God owes me way more than I owe God, because God was here first. I didn't need to be here until God brought me here. Now I'm here, I'm like, it's your fault. But coming back to this, like God in his compassion, he's Karuna Avatara, he takes the form of this like Avatara, like Dakshinamurti or something, who then teaches this guy, Durvasas. Or according to some other accounts, there are other people like Trambaka, Ardha Trambaka, like Shrikanta, like Amardaka, like that. There's like these like primordial sages to whom Lord Shiva reveals the revelation. It's arguably the case that Lord Shiva reveals the non-dual revelations to one sage. He reveals the dualistic revelations to another sage, and to a third sage, he reveals the non-dual revelations to a sage. Yeah, so he's like revealing like different. Oh. Yeah, he's like revealing different revelations to different people. Like, but why? It's a good question. Like, why would he reveal to different people different revelations? One answer is because Shiva is the perfect guru, and as the perfect guru, he intuits what that person needs and what that person will be spiritually nourished by. So what he says to Amardaka might be different from what he says to Trambaka. Because Trambaka maybe has the adhikari, not necessarily the competency, but the predisposition for non-dual teachings. Whereas Amardaka, as a sage, as a rishi, might be most benefited by dualistic teachings. So when Lord Shiva reveals his teaching, called the Tantra, he reveals the Shaiva Agama to Amardaka. And then to someone else, Srinatha or Shrikanta, I forget, Raudra Agama. And to Trambaka, he reveals non-dual, like called Bhairava Agamas. You know, so we were talking about Dakshinamurti, Sadashiva, Bhairava, like different representations of Shiva, because Shiva represents himself differently to different people. And so they're all, maybe they're three. Another account, which I actually quite like, I love this account, because it positions Durvasas as the founder of Shaivism, which I love. I love this narrative, because Durvasas is a really cranky, grumpy, problematic guy. So the founder of Shaivism is as weird as the god to whom the tradition is ascribed. Like yesterday's whole conversation was about how fucking weird Shiva is. And how fucking weird it is that we don't understand how fucking weird Shiva is. Because the Puranas present him as the weirdest, most fucked up guy ever. In every possible way. Like anything you could have a problem with about a person is God. Like that's a God. The theology of Shaivism positions God Puranically as a somewhat problematic figure because of his liminality, his unpredictability, his antisocial nature, his, cremation grounds kind of thing. So the depiction of Shiva as weird is important and compounded by the fact that the revelation of Shaivism is given to this particular sage who is particularly grumpy. Which is very interesting because it argues for I don't want to get into it, but I just think it's cool. It's cool that the one to whom Shiva reveals this is a fully enlightened being who is also, like Swami Vivekananda, saying things that he later regrets. Like Ramakrishna, a person with feelings who grieves over the loss of somebody. Not like a peaceful, quiet stone Buddha in like some garden somewhere. A living person with anger and with emotions and whatnot, and that person is no less enlightened, as it were. So, the revelation to Durvasas is threefold. And it's argued that then Durvasas or some being like this projects himself into three forms or creates three mind-born children. Did you do the... Oh, I guess it's after. Yeah. You know what I was thinking? Because we already offered this. We'll talk about that later. But okay, so... No, good. Yeah, serve, definitely. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm coming to the end anyway. So, and plus, please, eat. But this idea that there are three teachers. Either there are three teachers who are the mind-born children of one teacher, or there are three people to whom Lord Shiva revealed three different revelations. Now, what we're doing here is we're saying that the dualistic agamas and the non-dualistic agamas are both revelations of Lord Shiva. They're just different. So the 92 or so tantras, otherwise known as agamas, and there are some people who want to distinguish between tantras and agamas. According to some people, a tantra is more Shakta, more Kaula, and agama is more Shaiva. In other words, they're saying the non-dual stuff is a tantra. The dualistic or qualified non-dualistic stuff is an agama. So there are ways in which we use the word agama and tantra differently. But I conflate them. When I say tantra, I mean agama. When I say agama, I mean tantra. It's not important thing. It's the agamic tradition. The tantric tradition is the agamic tradition, which is the revelation of Lord Shiva, which is later given a Buddhist context, a Vaishnava context, a Jain context, and maybe even Islamic context. But originally, it is a Shaiva world in which the tantras appear, and they are all of them texts that present the teachings of Shiva. But we have to remember, Shiva being the weirdo that he is, referred to the lecture I gave yesterday, it's weird that he says so many different things to so many different people, and it seems like there are at least three modes in which Lord Shiva gives his revelation. So,
Okay.
We then say in the Anuttaratrika tradition, it's like there are 3 Shaivisms. Just like there are 3 Vedantas. Or at least 3.
Okay, so
And the 3 Shaivisms can be further subdivided. Like Veera Shaivism versus all can be further subdivided. There are at least 8 different schools of Shaivism that you can point to. Pashupata versus like you can argue that Lakulisha is different from Pashupata. You can make all these distinctions, but at the very least you can say there are 3 types of religion, and Shaivism, like every other religion, is subscribing to these 3 forms. And Shiva teaches all 3. So you can understand these either hierarchically or pluralistically. So you could say that they're all 3 of them correct and true, but they're presented in a sequence. So you start with the duality, then you go to qualified non-duality, then you go to non-duality. In the case of my own anecdotal experience, my personal history is that I started in duality with exposure to Shaiva Agamas in the Śaiva Siddhanta world, and then through that I came into the Bhairava Agama world and kind of moved. I moved in the direction of the krama that they tend to argue for. So my own life, at least, is a testament to the fact that duality helped me with non-duality. But again, if I'm going to be honest, I think I revisited dualistic texts the more non-duality I was interested in. So it's almost like the karma can be flipped. It's like I became more interested in, I don't know, Shiva Jnana Bodha or something as a result of studying really non-dual shit like the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. You know, so it's like, is it a krama? And if it's a krama, is it one that goes back and forth? Or is it separate? Do I need to do non-duality? Isn't duality just enough? Or like, is duality naturally going to lead me to non-duality? These are all very deep and nuanced conversations, because Vivekananda himself, I think, was also like struggling to understand how duality, qualified non-duality, and non-duality fit together. This is where Ramakrishna comes in. Ramakrishna, in one scene, so important, he's sitting with his direct disciples and he looks around the room. It says in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, he looks around the room and he sees only his inner circle are there. And then he says an inner circle teaching. So this is like a secret teaching. And the teaching is this. Jaima. The teaching is, the inner circle teaching is, I like Hanuman's Bhava. He said, and then he quotes the verse and he says, Deha Buddhyasmi, when I think I am the body, I am thy servant. When I think of myself as this incarnating being who is now Hanuman, I am a part and you are the whole. And when I think of myself as consciousness, then I am you. So what Hanuman is saying is that there are 3 ways to be, and I am all 3. So, but maybe at different times, right? Maybe when I feel like I'm the body, I'm a servant, and that's true. Das Bhav is possible for one who feels themselves to be this one. Then if I step back from my body and mind and feel myself as consciousness, it's possible that I still feel like a part in you, the whole. There's a song that I like to sing. The God is like water, all pervading everywhere. Right? Like we wrote that for Shivaratri 2021. I love to sing, it's one of my favorites. But then people have asked me about it. They've been like, you have the lyric in that song where it says, you are the whole and I am just a single part. And they're like, but don't you say that you are Shiva? Like, aren't you teaching non-dual Shaivism? Why is it that in your song there's a verse and you're saying that like you're part and God is the whole? Like that's Ramanuja or something like that, right? I was like, I want to be able to say that that was the bhava that I was in, but it's not. I just wanted something to rhyme with heart. And but like the part to the whole is what Hanuman feels when he identifies with the jiva. Oneness, I am God, is what Hanuman feels when he identifies with consciousness. What he's saying is that there's a body, there's a mind, and there's a spirit, and I am all 3. Or I can be all 3. And it's valuable to be all 3. And the 3 religions are all equally true. And so what Ramakrishna might be saying is that, like, I could be a dualist in the morning, a non-dualist in the evening, and like that would be fine. Because there's a dynamism to these traditions. So Shiva reveals these 3 things. They sometimes feel mutually exclusive, and if they feel mutually exclusive, you can solve that dilemma by rejecting the authority of texts that are different, right? But if they do feel mutually exclusive, there's another way you can do this, where you just say it's a sequence. What Sri Ramakrishna seems to be suggesting is so radical. It's not even a sequence. They're all equally true simultaneously at the same time. That's crazy. And then when we look at actual Kaulachara, actual Vamachara text, you'll see that the mantras that they use, a lot of them are just Vedic. Om Tat Vishnu Paramam Padam. Weren't we looking at a Vamachara text just the other day? And notice almost every mantra is like a super orthodox Vedic mantra. Even in the context of Panchamakas. Like it's like crazy, right? Like in real time, in practice, the primary sources, which are the Tantras, revealed by Lord Shiva, it seems to argue this exact point, that all 3 are together together presented. That's why I love Vamachara, I love Kaulachara, because I see in Kaulachara that spirit, which I think is made possible with the Kaulachara framework that everything is Shiva. The reason why we rubbish notions of purity and impurity is because we make this claim that everything is Shiva. The reason why we emphasize Svatantra, and that's another term I want to come to, is because we say I am Shiva. So if I am Shiva and if everything is Shiva, that allows a certain level of inclusion, flexibility, and richness that I'm totally like sold by. Like I love it. Like I'm obsessed with it. Because to me it feels most true. But that doesn't have to be true for others, you know. And it certainly wasn't true of my community in which I grew up. I'm in this Vamachara world, but not because I was taught it by my grandfather. I was taught Shaivism by my grandfather. But part of our Shaiva heritage is this world, which seems to be the culmination of the Shaiva Agamas and the Raudra Agamas, right? That is one way to think of things. But the point I just want to make now is that a primary source in Tantra, which is in the interest of doing foundational things now and just defining our terms and being very clear about what we mean when we say Tantra. When I say Tantra, I mean a scriptural tradition that emerged in India around the 5th or 6th century AD. It emerged first historically within Shaivism, and Alexis Sanderson G has like very good academic work to prove this. But from Shaivism, it migrates to Buddhism, it migrates into Jainism and Vaishnavism and whatnot. But in the Shaiva context, when we say Tantra, we mean any text or any oral teaching whose source is Shiva. And in that text, you're likely to find 4 parts. One is philosophical, Jnanapada. Second is mystical or yogic, Yogapada. Third one is ritualistic, Kriyapada. And the fourth one is usually about temple building, clothing, codes of conduct, how we relate to one another. For example, this is a good one. Whenever you gather with your members of Sangha, always do a puja. It's one of the rules. In one of the tantras it says like, never get together with members of your Sangha and not do a puja. Or when your guru's brother visits, do a special puja, Naimittikam pujas, all these like various things that you're supposed to do just to be polite in the context of that tradition. So Ramakrishna might say, regard all women as your mother. Like that's a Charyapada statement. It's not necessarily a meditation. It's not really a ritual. It's arguably not really a philosophical teaching. It's just like a code of conduct. You know, like when you offer somebody something, offer it with your right hand. Be mindful. Don't blow candles out. It's weird. People think Kaulachara spaces are spaces where there aren't rules. No, I will freak out if you blow a candle out with your mouth. Why? That's so Dakshinacharya. I mean, it's there. It's a code of conduct. It's like there's still rules. They're just different because what would work on a golf court doesn't work in the basketball court or whatever, right? I don't think it's called a golf court. Golf course. So that being said, there are rules and they might be specific to that lineage, but these rules sometimes don't have any yogic or necessarily any philosophical or even any ritual purpose. They might have to do with just maintaining a community in order to support those other 3 things. So it could also have to do with architecture of a temple, which might be rooted in yogic principles. Whatever the case may be, generally a tantra will have these 4 things: knowledge or philosophy, mantra or visualization practice, yoga, or like mandalas and like mystical internal practices, ritual, which can be internalized or which can be externally done, which is usually the case. Like rituals are very literal. And fourthly, Charyapada, but they're all very fluid. They all go together. So I think Tantra is essentially a manual for practice. So we call, another way of describing the tradition is Upaya Shastra. Upaya Shastra means it's a science of means. It's a presentation of different spiritual tools. And that's all that it wants to do. I think that's the interesting thing. The Tantra is not necessarily interested in telling you what reality is like. It's a revelation from reality. And by reality, we use the word Shiva. Again, the word is up for grabs, and we'll talk about it on another night. But by Shiva is meant reality. And reality teaches. It teaches us the Tantras. And what's in the Tantras? Methods for realizing reality. That's all a Tantra is. And now the concept of Paratantra and Svatantra. The word Tantra refers to text. There's so many different texts, and not everybody, we don't have to read all the text, right? So usually, historically speaking, the text that you get is the text that your grandfather had. That was all you had access to. It's like your grandfather gives you Tantra, you just do this Tantra. Now we have access to so many Tantras. Now empowered with the Anubandha Chatushtaya, the questions of what is this text about, what is its goal, who am I and is it for me, and will this text meaningfully get me to my goal? First of all, what is the goal of this text? Is it my goal? Second of all, what's in this text and is it interesting to me? Third of all, who am I and will I actually benefit from this? And having answered all of those questions, you can take up a Tantra. And when you take up a Tantra, you're likely just going to find instructions for ritual. A lot is like labdva, gyatva, kritva, which in Sandatva, the end there means having done this or having done that. So dhyatva, having meditated on this form, now do this. almost everything in the Tantra is, having done this, now do that. You know, like, it's interesting. It doesn't tell you why necessarily. Tantra is not interested in explaining itself. It just tells you what to do. Isn't that beautiful? It's like simple. Tantra is kind of direct. Even when it has philosophical reasoning, it often does in the beginning, it will say something about samsara, a jiva is bound in this way. And then Kularnava Tantra, Lord Shiva talks about hells and shit. He's like a person who drinks wine will go to Naraka. The Arnava means ocean. Kularnava Tantra, sorry. The Kularnava Tantra, one of the more modern but very left-leaning tantras, which teaches you the Panchamakaras and all that. Like, it opens with this statement: are all donkeys great yogis because they wander about naked? Are all parrots great scholars because they can parrot back the words of their betters? Are all drunkards enlightened in God? Are all married couples enlightened in God? It's very funny because like drinking wine, having sex, eating meat, walking around naked, living in cremation grounds, none of those things will help you realize God. And then the text goes on to teach you those practices. Notice how self-aware these traditions are, because they're being articulated within cultures, like I said yesterday, that are incredibly orthodox. You know, so the Kalanava Tantra itself opens with this disclaimer that, like, be careful, we're going to teach some things, but let's talk about philosophically, let's talk about why. And then it talks about the concept of even Naraka, hell, and like doing something wrongly will lead you to hell. Even like in the Kalanava Tantra, chapter 15, it tells you that if you meditate on like cement, you'll be poor. Stuff like that. It's very superstitious. Like, I'm sitting on a particular kind of asana. I'm like, oh, but it's not. So it's like these things, the Tantra just tells you them, right? They're not really interested in explaining them. Therefore, a Tantra is usually not very helpful on its own. In fact, it's not very easy to read because it just presupposes you know a bunch of other shit. Like I showed you that text the other day where it said Gangadi, and the mantra, which is with the Adi, is like assuming you already knew the mantra. It was like, now purify this vessel with the mantra. I didn't give you the mantra, it says something Adi. It's like it assumes you know it. So the problem with the Tantra is that it expects a kind of human-to-human interaction for it to be accessed. It doesn't think that you're going to read the Tantra without a human around. So therefore, it's like shorthand notes. You know, it assumes that there's somebody who will guide you through the Tantra. Hence, the Guru Parampara becomes very important. I would think that's the only reason it's important. If you want to think from a very modern point of view. All mystical claims aside, the reason you need a guru is because the Tantra is not complete, and arguably you can only learn it from someone who has a complete understanding of it, who gets it from their teacher, who gets it from their teacher, but the thing that's being handed down is like shorthand notes to help that teacher expand. So then what you get in the Tantric world, what's more helpful, I think, is exegetical material. These are the texts to which I'm most loyal. And it's within those exegetical materials that Tantras are provided. So often the only reason we have Tantras is because they were copiously quoted from and presented within the context of a larger work whose mission it was to explain the Tantras, provide more philosophical context for Tantras, explore the implications of the verses and things like that. So Tantra Loka is a great example of this. Tantra Loka is a master in the Tantric tradition, attempting to not only systematize his Shaiva lineage, but to explain why we do what we do. That's mostly what this is about. We're learning what to do, but I'm more interested in the why. You know, because that's what the Tantric world, I think, does best. It exegetically, and by exegesis I mean explaining something, right? So it exegetically explores the manuals that Shiva reveals. So the question then is, does Shiva reveal the exegesis or the manuals? Because the manuals don't really seem to provide that much philosophy. So we're going to say non-dual, dual, qualified, these are philosophical claims. So is Shiva making those claims? No. Masters who are doing the rituals are coming to certain realizations, and then based on those realizations, they're providing exegetical teachings about those verses. You know, so there's a way, by the way, there's a way to do this where you never at all ask any questions, and you just do what's on the page. It'll work. If you have faith in the text, it'll work. But I don't think we should do things in that way. Because what if you do a text, and then you get to the conclusion and you realize it's not what you wanted? So that's why the exegesis is important, because it tells you the why, and having understood the why, then you can be interested in whether or not it's for you. So when it comes to like exegetical work, we have Abhinavagupta, we have Kshema Raja, we have Sadhya Jyoti, we have all these great commentators, and they're humans, and we have their names, and they're historical figures. Bhoja Raja, who reads the Yoga Sutra without Vyasa's commentary, without Bhoja Raja's commentary? Everything we know about the Yoga Sutra is coming to us not from the Sutra. The sutras aren't even complete sentences, some of them. So everything we know about the Yoga Sutra comes to us through the exegetical and commentarial traditions around that sutra. So in this like like foundations lecture, it's like important to note that what we are studying together is mostly these exegetical works, which help us understand the primary sources to which we are most loyal, called the Tantras. And so what are we? In a sense, you can't deny this, we're Shaivas, because the practice that we do is rooted in a tradition that is said to have been revealed by Lord Shiva. But thankfully, the way that we're going to define Shiva is more Ramakrishnan, which allows us to be Christians and Muslims. You know what I mean? Like, this is not a Shaiva space in the sense that we're using the word Shiva to mean a sectarian notion of God. But it's still important to recognize that it's a cultural and historical context called Shaivism from which these traditions came. That's all I want. This disclaimer is very important. And now you're eating Tamil food. That's important. And you're saying Manakam and Valtakal and Nandri. Because if you forget that we are Dravidians, if you forget that we're Tamils, you will project upon us all your Abrahamic Aryan concepts, and it's not wrong. You're right to do that. They're just different. And we have to acknowledge that at least. That what you're going to learn here and hear here is different. And knowing that, we can be a bit more discerning as to whether or not it's for us. You know? Okay, coming back to the last thing, just coming to the end now. Not that I'm in any particular hurry. We've got our food and all that. Are you okay? It's chilling? Okay? Because we're going so hard, I also want to like keep you up or whatever. But, oh, it's raining again. That's beautiful. That's so sweet. Oh, you guys are going at like 2 a.m., right? You have to get the road. Huh? 2 a.m.? What time is it now? Oh, the rain should stop by now. It's like 10. It's like 10. I think we're fine.
It's okay. I've lived in Florida my whole life. I'm driving to this almost every day.
Yeah, but she lives in Arizona. So she doesn't...
Well, when I'm gone, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, but you're driving.
Well, I can drive to LAX and then I'm going to be dropped off to there, but they have to go to Arizona.
Oh, okay.
But we're heading east, so I don't think we're going to be dealing with the same nonsense.
Yeah, that's true.
I just need bus money.
Okay, cool. But yeah, if you need to, like, the food's there or whatever, I'll wrap up real quick though. Because the last thing to say is that, like, you can't deny that these tantras come from Shiva, but you also shouldn't study them directly because they will have very little meaning, I think, for most of us. But we should have access to them. So what we do is we create padhatis. Padhatis mean ritual manuals. The mantras are from the tantric tradition as a whole, but disclaimer, the way we arrange those mantras, which mantras we select and which mantras we don't select, is a human editing process. And so the exegetical work now becomes very important because they're essentially padhatis. Like when you look at Tantra Loka, people like are mostly interested in the philosophical part, but that's only really the first 5 chapters. Arguably the first 15 chapters. I don't know. By the time you get to chapter 8, things start getting a little wonky. I think it's only like really the first 5 chapters that people like to talk about philosophically. A lot of the Tantra Loka is just funeral rites, initiation rites, different kinds of dikshas. See, in the Western world, mantra diksha is the only kind of diksha they like usually talk about. But there's like all these, like in the Shaiva world, all these different abhishekams. Purna abhishekam at the very end, but like it's different adhikaris with different abhishekams, and you know, a lot of oil was dunked on my head for a lot of different reasons. You could say, like there's a lot of different kinds of things. It's like what we get in the West is kind of a caricature of the Shaiva diksha tradition, which is like several initiates, krama, like think of Sri Vidya, where it's like there's a krama Ganesh into, like a Ganesh into Bala Tripura Sundari, into like, and even the Bala mantra can develop, you know, where it can be like mirrored and flipped. It's a wonderful thing. So there's a krama, the sequence, and a lot of that is presented in the text. So Tantra Loka, it's so beautiful. It also helps us understand what work we're doing together. It's like we're essentially building padhatis. You know, padhati is a ritual manual, and the ritual is based on the tantric tradition. But the exegetical work of explaining why we want certain mantras in the padhati as opposed to others, why mantras appear in this sequence, and why we would even want to do the ritual, that's the work of the exegete. Also, academically speaking, the word exegete and eisegete are different. Eisegesis is anytime you interpret a text to make it mean what you want it to mean. In other words, when you interpret the text, you try to interpret it to bring it into your tradition. And Shankara does this a lot. A good example is text torturing. Isha vasyam midagam sarvam Tena taktena bhunjita ma gridha kasyas vidanam. What is tena taktena bhunjita? I mean, if you take the word bhunjita, the root there is bhoga, to eat, to enjoy. Which I would argue that Dravidian culture does quite well. Like the word, like Shaivism is not worried about like the world in the way that some other traditions might be, right? Like asukam lokam, like that idea of the world is really scary, really bad. Like that's not necessarily true for, like the world as bad is not necessarily true for every religion. Like Islam, Islam is a bit different from Christianity. It's a bit more, I guess, receptive to worldly enjoyment. Bhoga is not seen as problematic. Even Sadhyo Jyoti comments on moksha, but he also comments on bhoga. He has two texts, moksha karika and bhoga karika, because it's still valuable to talk about what it means to be happy in this world. And Shaiva doesn't get that. The world is not scary to them. And look, I'm going to make a whole other point about that another time. But really, that's one of the key differences in Shaivism from other traditions. But like notice, this whole conversation around Bhoga and moksha is one of the things that makes Tantra controversial and a bit tense with other traditions that have more stark. Anyway, so coming to this Bunjita means something like bhoga, to eat, to enjoy. So the Upanishad says, renounce the world so you can enjoy it. It's really interesting. It's from a Shaiva point of view, it's like only Shiva can play and enjoy the world. So Shiva is maximally involved in the world. Fuck, he is the world. Because he's free. Only someone who is free can really engage. So meaning the only reason to go to the movie theater is because you are not the character. That's how you will enjoy watching a character get dismembered on screen. Right. But if you are the character, leave. Don't go to a place where you will be dismembered. See, like I was saying yesterday, the only reason you will go to a place where dismemberment happens is if it's fun and not actually harmful. Right. And that's a movie theater or a BDSM dungeon or something. So all of this is Shiva's BDSM dungeon. He's got a safe word. And the safe word is, Aham Brahmasmi. I give you the safe word right now. You're not the body, you're not the mind. You're free. Like nothing. There's no problem. None of us have any problems here. We're fine. Nobody can harm us. It's fine. And so we play. It's wonderful, right? Like knowing you're free and safe now. Go to the movie theater. Like this is the world. It's wonderful. But like notice, I don't think that's going to work for Shankara. He's trying to establish a monastic order that needs to deal with Buddhist transcendentalism. I don't even think Shankara has to be a transcendentalist here. He's just living in a cultural context where he has to fight the Buddhist influence that is diminishing the Vedic tradition. So Buddhists are, like in that time especially, very much, world sucks. The world is impermanent. It's going to cause suffering. Don't engage with it. Shankara needs to see how the historical context is so important here. Shankara needs to found his own monastic order that represents Vedic ideals based on the Buddhist model. So therefore the Buddhist influence is going to be quite strong in Shankara. So much so that you can even call Shankara and Gaudapada crypto-Buddhists. Many of the Hindus in the Indian world call Shankara crypto-Buddhist. But it's wonderful, crypto-Buddhist. He's secretly a Buddhist, but he speaks out against the Buddha and teaches something using the word Brahman, but means basically the same thing as the Buddha. And we, in the Tantric world, make fun of it. We say, you guys, you talk about pots so much. Your absolute reality has become a pot. Brahman is just inert. In one sense, Brahman is just consciousness, not even self-aware. Svat Prakasha is not necessarily Vimarsha. That's where Sanskrit will help you. Those terms are technical and important. Svat Prakasha versus Vimarsha and all that. Where the sword comes in handy. Not to kill, but to protect. So now, coming back to this point, what does it mean, Tena Tekena Bunjita? Renounce the world and enjoy the world. Shankara, if he says this crazy Shaiva thing, he'll be discredited. He won't be able to do his mission. To found a monastery alongside the Buddhist monasteries is to, in some way, shape, or form, concede to the cultural and philosophical framework of that time, which Swami Vivekananda had to do when he was in this country, to a large extent. And he would write in his private letters the things that he felt he couldn't say to an American audience and shouldn't have said. I don't yet have that wisdom, I think. I say what I want. But I'm realizing now, no, I should be careful. I should say to the audience what that audience wants. I just want to say what I want. So I don't have a mission, right?
What would they be more receptive to?
Yeah, a responsible teacher would think that. But I'm not a responsible teacher because I'm not a teacher. I don't think but what am I doing now? Am I evading the role of teacher by sharing? No, I just think that there are texts, and the texts are teaching, and we're doing our best together in a spirit of equality to understand those texts. So most of what we do together is read books together. We're a glorified book club. But the books that we like are called Shastras. Shastras are the Astras. Our loyalty is to the texts. The only weapon we need is the Shastra. Astra means weapon. So Shastra is the Astra. And what is a weapon for? It's a weapon for destroying delusion, ignorance. The trident that we hold on to is the text. Everything comes down to this. So we have interest in the text, and we're learning about the text, and we're applying who is the text for, what is the text about, what is the goal of the text, what's the sambandha, all that stuff. Learning the Sanskrit, trying to understand the commentators and what the commentators had to say about it, all the exegetical work around it. That's our work. That's what we do together. And is there a mission here? I don't know. But when there is a mission, when there is some work to do, then you have to ask other questions. If you're a teacher, you ask, how can I best give what the student needs for their development? And that's what Shiva is. Shiva alone is a teacher who has given all these different things. You know, like, so that's interesting because Shiva might be thinking, what do I need to present for that person? Now Shankara arguably is a teacher, but he's also a systematizer. I think if you were in private with Shankara, he might say something that is totally different from what he's writing about. Because what he's writing about is for something else, to establish something that he has interest in. Therefore, what is he going to do about this thing? Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Like, it means to enjoy the world. Shankara cannot say that because if he says enjoy the world in that Buddhist renunciation context, he will be kicked out. So instead he says, it means to protect. And the way he does this is so convoluted, using the Sanskrit dhatu. It's like, oh, actually it means protect. But if you use that dhatu, you need a noun. But the verse doesn't have a noun. So Shankara then adds a word. I kid you not, he says, oh, it's implied. He says, the word is Atma. So he would translate this verse to say, by renouncing the world, enjoy the world. He'll say, no, by renouncing the world, protect. Protect what? The self. But the word self doesn't appear there. He adds it. You see what happens here? Ramanuja, Shankara, Madhava, Abhinavagupta, arguably what I'm doing is not actually exegesis. It's eisegesis. But we're aspiring to exegesis. This is another way of just saying confirmation bias. It's like we have an experience, we speak from that experience, and we interpret text based on that experience. And because we all have a different experience, we're all of us entitled to our own interpretation. So what is this community about if not to provide you with the tools to do just that? Not only to have an experience, but to interpret text in light of that experience. That's why learning music, learning Sanskrit, having a kalari practice, doing martial arts, and like physically developing yourself, and learning grammar, and learning Sanskrit grammar, and learning debate, and like all these things are so important for empowerment. It's a Promethean fire that we want to give, not a cult or a community that we want to create. It's not about an individual. It's about a tradition, and it's about a tradition that is represented, I will argue, by its text, by its living transmission. You know. Because we still, the rituals, we still do them based on the text. Now, if Shiva reveals these tantras, and these tantras are manuals, we have to take seriously the exegetical work around those manuals. And it would be nice if in our community we studied different exegetical traditions. Like say, Sadhyo Jyoti is a dualist. It'd be good to study some of Sadhyo Jyoti stuff, Moksha Karika or whatever. Right now we're doing Vijnana Bhairava, mostly we're using like Shema Raja's commentary. But like, Vijnana Bhairava is super non-dual, super kaula. And now I was presenting in Friday's classes the Paramarthasara, which I like because it's straddling the difference. Abhinava wants to teach the Vijnana Bhairava stuff, but he's teaching it to an audience for whom that might be too much too soon. So he's doing it in a way that's kind of very like skillful. So it's helpful for me also to see how Abhinavagupta presents Kali without ever saying Kali. The same way Vivekananda presents Ramakrishna without ever saying Ramakrishna. So I like the Paramarthasara because it's not a tantra. The Paramarthasara is purely philosophical and it's interested in arguing what Jivan Mukti looks like. But it is coming from the Tantric tradition, from the Shaiva tradition. And Abhinavagupta says, I'm now going to tell this tale, I'm now going to like interpret the text from a Shaiva point of view. You know, and so I would start with that. Like having learned Sanskrit, coming to the Tantric world, we start with a primer. Primer meaning introduction. And the Paramarthasara is a pretty good one. Abhinavagupta's Paramarthasara is, in my opinion, like as far as Sanskrit literature is concerned, a very sensible and good introduction to the Tantric world. Although it is not itself a Tantra. Then once you start getting acclimated, you start interacting with Tantras, then you get things like the Tantra Loka, etc. So now what we're going to do, when we do the ritual, we have a padati, right? That padati is something that's being handed down, but it's also something that's being developed. But the mantras you'll see across padatis are more or less the same. So what you get in a Vamachara padati are maybe mantras that are not there in a Dakshinachara padati, but the Dakshinachara padati will probably have mantras that are there in the Vamachara padati. That's kind of interesting. Like they share these mantric things. So the question I'm asking is, what is Tantra? And I think this is so much for now. It's just in text that are mostly about rituals, but I want to include in that word Tantra secondary sources that is all the philosophical stuff that we do around those rituals. We're trying to understand the meanings of the rituals. And so we say there are two things, Jnana and Kriya. And the Vedas themselves are divided into the Upanishads and we call them Karma Kanda. And there's a debate as to which one is proper and good and real and worth spending time on. The Jnana Kanda people say, forget about the rituals, just focus on philosophy. The ritual people say, forget about philosophy, don't ask why, just do. What Abhinavagupta wants to argue for and what many people want to argue for is this, both. Jnana and Karma are one. What you do is what you think, and what you think is also a kind of doing. So Jnana Shakti and Kriya Shakti are both expressions of Icha Shakti. And therefore you can't say, oh, it's a ritual, don't do a ritual. And you can't say, oh, it's philosophy, don't do philosophy. It's like it's both. And so when I say Tantra, I'm going to think of the primary sources as a karma kanda, manuals for ritual. And I'm going to think of the secondary sources as jnana kanda, manuals for philosophical contemplation. Some of you will not need the rituals. For some of you, it will be enough to think and contemplate and do internal practices. So you might prefer things like Paramartha Sara or things like Tantra Sara, like that. Some of you will not like to contemplate and think and do these kinds of things. You might be more ritualistic. And therefore, you just want to learn rituals. How to do mudras and mantras. And that's your bhava. That's going to be... Then you'll want padatis. You'll want more padatis. And that should be here in our space too. So I like them both, and I want to present them both, the secondary and the primary sources. So Abhinava Gupta's Tantra Loka to me is so cool because it's both. It's exegesis or eisegesis and rituals. Like if I'm going to teach, like say, Kaula Puja, often I'm getting it from Tantra Loka, or we're getting it from texts like the Shakta Pramodaha or something. Or, so there's a lot of texts available. And this should give you the lay of the land. Now, as far as Shaivism is concerned, there's two streams, Atimargism and Mantramargism. Atimargism is an ascetic form of Shaivism that is represented usually by sadhus in the early part of the tradition who are worshipping Rudra with Vedic mantras, mainly the Pancha Brahma mantras, which we chanted a lot yesterday. Right? Like Sadhyojatam Prapadyami. Like basic Shaivism is using these 5 mantras to worship Sadhyojata, Vamadeva, Tatpurusha, Agora, Tatpurusha, Ishana, like these 5 parts of Shiva's body, the 5 faces of Shiva. We don't need to get into that now. But the Atimarga movement is ascetic Shaivism that arguably was the founding of our tradition. Mantra Margism is it could be equally ascetic, but it's a bit different in that it focuses on mantra mainly. So if you want to call this anything, it's the Mantra Marga, the path of the mantra. And therefore, puja is nothing but saying mantras. And in the Kularnava Tantra, puja is considered the lowest of all the tantric practices. Better than puja is japa and stotra. So when you chant stotrams, like say, Kamakya, we did the Kamakya stotram yesterday, but stotrams like Dakshinamurti stotram, Kamakya stotram, Kadgamala stotram, Dakshina Kali stotram, just now you did Kali Sahasranama stotram. If you chant stotrams, according to the Kularnava Tantra, that's better than doing puja. And you know what we say to that? Yes and.
Yes.
Like, we do the puja and we chant the stotrams. And arguably what's better than a stotram? Japa. Better than the chanting, like Jayanti Mangala, Kali, Bhadra Kali, Kapali, that's really good, but you can just do that mechanically. Isn't it better than just chant mother's mantra? Like, just saying one thing over and over and over again, that might go further than just chanting stotrams. So japa and stotrams don't require, like, mudras and all these kinds of, you just chant aloud or internally. Then when it comes to japa, even the mantra that you chant can be chanted aloud, whispered, or internally, right? And then we get to the next thing, ajapa, we don't want to touch now, but higher than japa is dhyana, meditation. So what you do with your hands is not as important as what you do, arguably, with your mouth, with your speech, which arguably is not as important as what you do with your mind. And then they say something deeper. That's not going to be as deep as what you do in spirit, as it were, samadhi. So samadhi doesn't require puja, doesn't require japa, it doesn't even require stotram japa, it doesn't even require meditation. It's something beyond even meditation. It's being, pure being. And so if you think of these 4 parts of Tantra, you have the rituals, which are external, you have the mantras, which are somewhere between external and internal, and you have the internal practice of meditation, usually visualization and concentration. And then you have this secret 4th thing, which is absorption, which can be attained through any one of these 3 means, individually or all together. So in our community, we take a more Ramakrishna, more Vivekananda approach of saying all together. Stotrams, japa, puja, homa, this is like what it looks like day to day in our tantric sadhana. It looks like this, practicing with mantras. I am not going to subscribe to the 70s culturally appropriated TM idea of mantra diksha being the only kind of diksha, and the idea of a human being able to give diksha. That's just not the Shaiva understanding. It's like, it's an understanding, but it's not mine. And Shiva alone gives mantras, and there's not a specific, like this mantra, you got, now you're forever. No, it's like the whole puja is nothing but mantra. You have to remember, like, everything in the puja is mantra, everything in an Upanishad is mantra. Mantra is any articulation. Urdve prano hyado jive para ucharet. It's like uchara, the articulation of the supreme is any Sanskrit literature. So the stotram, if you chant a stotram, that's a mantra. Look, at the end of the Chandi, Devi Mahatmya, which is 700 verses within the Markandeya Purana, it's really important to note this, that the japa that they do is not with I'm claim someone, it's not with a mantra, right? It's with a stotram. And which stotram? Like what is the japa mantra, arguably, that Surata and Samadhi are doing on the bank of the river at the end of the Chandi after Sumedha Muni has taught them all this stuff? What do they do japa with? Yes, from the Rig Veda. 8 verses from the Veda. Chanting those verses over and over and over again is called japa. Not some mantra that your guru gave you. And like that's great and all, but it's just like not the only way to think of things, you know. And I'm hoping to expand our discourse on the tantras a bit. When you recite a stotram again and again and again, that's called japa actually. It's just your mantra is pretty long. So yesterday we did a few Hanuman Chalisas. And you know, in the Hanuman Jayanti tradition, it's like you like do 11 or 44 or 108. In the text, it's given. There's an instruction where it's like, you know, Tulsidasa is saying like, with Gaurisha as my witness. And yesterday on Shivaratri, it's always nice to do this. You know, Hanuman and Shiva, and like it's great. But anyway, he's saying with Gaurisha, with Lord Shiva, Tulsidas was in Varanasi. We visited his house actually. It's very beautiful. But in Varanasi, he composed Hanuman Chalisa, and he said, Lord Shiva, who's the Lord of Kashi, witness me as I say this. And he makes a promise about the text, and he says, you should chant it this many times, and you'll get all these awesome things. Right? Durlabham Mavapnoti. It's very hard to get these boons, but if you do this many times, you get this boon. In the Mahalakshmi Ashtakam we chanted, it says if you chant it once, you destroy all Mahapap, right? Like Mahapapa Vinashini. If you chant it twice, you become rich. You get all the wealth. If you chant it 3 times, you destroy all your enemies. So it's like the Falastutis tell you what you get, but it's japa oriented. It's like do this many times. You see, that's baked into the tradition. So when it comes to things like Hanuman Chalisa, you could do japa with the Chalisa. Just go front to back, Mangala Mordima, and just go all the way, and then do it again, and then do it again. You can do it with Devi Sutkam, you can do it with the Chandi. You see, change your idea around mantras. It's not just a small like, phrase, you know. The reason I think those are helpful is because this can be sold. It's easy to be like, pay me a bunch of money and I'm going to give you this mantra and like that's it. And that works. I'm not knocking it. It's just not the only thing. So I hope that in this community especially, we can model what I believe is a more traditional Shaiva understanding of mantra. Expanding mantra to mean more than just that thing you paid thousands of dollars for that was told to you in your left ear and now means you're part of the tradition. It takes way more than hearing some guy give you a mantra to be part of the tantric tradition. Most people who get mantras never do purashanas with them. They never do homas. They never do pujas. They don't even chant stotrams. In what sense then are they doing tantra? In no sense. Because to do tantra is to engage with the tantras. And what are the tantras telling us to do? Puja, stotram, japa, homa. So a day in the life here looks like that. We're tantrics, we're Shaivas. We are applying a Ramakrishna and Vivekananda lens on how we interact with these ideas. But it really looks like Purashana. This looks like mantra. Because we are not in the Atimarga stream, although I like to talk about Pashupatras and Lakulishas and all. That's great, I love it. I have more of a historical and lineage interest in those things. But in fact, we are practicing the Mantra Marga. We are the path of the mantras. So in the Shaiva Tantric world, we belong to the Marga, the path called the Mantra Marga. And within the Mantra Marga, this is also interesting, there are separate streams. They're called Pirtas. So within the Mantra Marga, there are 3 Pirtas. The first Pirta is called the Bhairava Pita, Yamala Pita, and then Vidya Pita. Oh, sorry, no, Mantra Pita. Sorry. Mantra Pita, Yamala Pita, and Vidya Pita. All the Pitas are important to me, but I particularly like the Vidya Pita, which we can call Shaktism. So within Shaiva philosophy and practice, there is a particular niche devoted to the goddess, Shakti. And all over India, whether it's Nagama or Periyaman, whether it's Kali or whether it's Matangi or Kamakshi or Meenakshi, these are all Shakta traditions. So my rule here is you will not think of Lakshmi and Saraswati and Kali and Durga and Chamunda and Chandika as like different. Fuck you all, it's just Shakti. You know, Shakti is Shakti. And we're understanding it in the Shaiva sense. And where do we get that understanding? If not from the Vidyapita text like the Malini Vijayavara, the Devi Yamala Tantra, the Jayadatta Yamala Tantra. That's what Tantra Raja Bhattarik, like that's what I'm referring to, right? So it's very important that when I talk about Shakti, you don't conflate what I mean with what you probably have heard. Because there are other ways to talk about these things and they're equally valid. They're all great, just different. So we don't make a distinction. Like for us, Mahalakshmi is this, she's Durga, right? The warrior goddess, Mahalakshmi, like Saraswati. Like when I'm standing in front of Saraswati, I don't feel like I'm standing in front of a different Ishta. Like my Ishta is Shiva. Like make no mistake, I'm a Shaiva, my Ishta is Shiva. It's just that I read Shittikanta and I read Mahanaya Prakasha. I read Maheshwarananda and I read Maharta Manjari. There are all these texts that I want to bring you into. That's what I want to share. I want to share a world, a really beautiful, really cool world that requires some of these precursors, precedents, And in this world, we define Shiva as Shakti. So Shittikanta in the Mahanaya Prakasha tells us, Shiva Swabhaiva Eva Iti Shakti. Maybe to close, I'll read you some of those verses. I'll just go find them on my computer somewhere and just read you the verses on Shakti. So you understand that I am not a Shakta if by Shakta you mean a stream devoted to the goddess outside of the Shaiva world. I'm a Shaiva through and through. My name is Selvalingam, crying out loud. My father's name is Sodilingam. His father's name is Vaitalingam. His father's name is Nagalingam. I come from an ancestral lineage of lingams. I'm Tamil on my father's side, Malayali on my mother's side. I'm a Shaiva at the end of the day. And I worship Shiva. My Ishta is Shiva. But by Shiva I mean Shakti. Because Shiva Swabhaivaha iti Shaktihi. The essence of what it means to be Shiva is dynamism. So naturally, because I read Shiva as Shakti, the tantras that are most important to me are the tantras that worship Shakti. And those tantras tend to emphasize immanence. So when I look at Ramakrishna, when I look at Vivekananda, I'm interpreting them through a Shakta lens. Which means this world is God. So I love non-duality, but not just for the claim I am Shiva, but for the claim this is Shiva. This is Shiva. When I say this is Shiva, this is Shakti, it's Kali, it's Ma, it's Shiva. But the emphasis is on non-duality usually, and because of non-duality, we get some kind of more jazz as opposed to classical music. More, it's not transgressive actually. It's actually the opposite. We're not transgressing anything to say that everything is God. It's an attitude of total inclusion and acceptance. And it's from the Shakta point of view, this cult of the mother god point of view, that we're saying everyone is right, everyone is true, everyone is welcome. And we're trying to hold space for everyone. And however different we might all be, it's like a very Shakta thing to want to serve everyone anyway. The mother just does that. So from a bhavik, from a devotional point of view, Shakti has cultural significance. But I think from a philosophical point of view, it's important to clarify that we're referring to a movement within Shaivism called the Vidya Pita, which is within Mantra Marga, which is one of the two forms of Shaivism, distinct from the Ati Marga, which is part of the revelation of Shiva called the Agamas, called the Tantras. So this much for now. This is what we mean by the word Tantra. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Real quick, let me just pull out these verses for you. I said I would. Yeah. So it's interesting because yesterday, Namo Devi Mahadevi Shivaye like I was saying, that whole tradition called Shaivism can be explained just by that one verse. I still mean to do that with you at some point. But here's just some sources. So according to Abhinavagupta, right, this is Abhinavagupta's definition of Kali. And by the way, the word Kali, the root Kali, is very interesting. It can be taken in many different directions. Like it can also mean Kalpana, which means like to imagine or to visualize. So Kali is the visualization of Shiva. A beautiful reading. Shiva is meditating this world. Like this whole world is Shiva's inner journey of contemplation. So Shiva is a being, by definition, who contemplates. This is his contemplation. He's like, what would it be like to be crucified? And then the whole Jesus thing happens. It's like, what would it like to be rich? And then some island is bought. You're like, it's not really happening, but it is happening. Like it's happening within his mind. Like Shiva is just kalpana. He's right now, he's meditating. And he only ever does that. So he's just, I guess, taking a break from being absorbed and he's just like thinking about shit. And this is it. We're just Shiva's schizoid, paranoid. Like, I'm kidding. We are Shiva's like meditation. We're like Vishnu's dreams. We're Shiva's meditation.
Fleeting thoughts through meditation that we have sometimes.
Exactly. That's it. We are Shiva's fleeting thoughts during meditation. Shiva forgets he's Shiva because he gets distracted with like a nishantness. But he's just meditating and he just goes right back to, oh yeah, okay, I'm Shiva actually. It's so interesting to think of that in this way. Who is Kali then? Shiva's ability to dream up these worlds, which is actually valuable to him. So Kali is not something that he dislikes. It's something that he uses in order to explore the fullness of his being. So it's his Shakti. So he's Shiva, she is Shakti, he's Shaktiman and Shakti. So if you think of it in this way, Shakti is visualization power. If you can visualize something, you can manifest something. But we say there's no difference between visualization and manifesting. Manifesting something and visualizing something are two temporal aspects of the same event. So when you experience time, you experience in your physical world, arguably, what you first envision in your mental world. But if you step out of time, the two things are karma and jnana, same. The Ichcha, karma, and jnana are one. So from Shiva's point of view, just to visualize something is to be it. That's why we say, if you can think of God, if you visualize Thakur, or you visualize Shiva, or you visualize Kali, you're seeing Kali. Visualization is darshan. Isn't that beautiful? Beautiful thought. And of course you can see in the New Age, it's like Abraham Hicks kind of like language, manifestation language, or whatever. It's like, it's Shakta kind of view actually. And so what is Shakti? Your power to visualize. And so here, Abhinavagupta, he looks at various dhatus for the word Kali, and here's what he gives us. And importantly, this is very important to point out that you can take it in the Kalanam direction, and you can say this is all Shiva's visualization. You can take it in a time direction. You can take it in a black direction. Like what does black mean? Mahanirvana Tantra says, just as black absorbs all color, so too does Kali absorb all name and form. Oh no, so does Brahman absorb all name and form. Mahanirvana Tantra could very well be an attempt to conflate the word Brahman with Kali in order to bring Kali to a more Vedic and more popular audience. And Devi Gita does that to the same extent. I hope these references, like I'm making references to texts, like I hope something will catch you. Devi Gita, I want to study that. Or Mahanirvana Tantra, I want to study that. That's really my purpose. Like, again, I'm not loyal to a teacher, nor to a teaching, nor to any person, but to the text. And so what I have to offer, I think, is mainly this, just references to texts, and maybe a space in which we can together interpret them and practice them. So anyway, the Mahanirvana Tantra has so many things to say about it, but it uses the word Brahman, so it says Kali is black. The reason it wants to interpret Kali as black is because it's making a point. The way Brahman is devoid of all name and form, and yet absorbs all name and form, so too does Kali, who is black, absorb all things. And black absorbs all. And you say, why am I wearing? So my friend said to me, you used to wear all red, then you went to Kashi and came back, and now you wear all black. It's funny. And it's like, yeah, there's sadhanas involved, like with certain colors, And so, keeping that in mind, it's like, why would you define Kali a certain way? Depending on the theology. Now, Abhinav is trying to be inclusive, and he's trying to just give us a bunch of different ones. So here's what he says. Kshepo jnanam cha sankyam gatinada etikrama kalanam gurvati Kali karshani tyabidhiyate. Kali is defined as Kali karshani. Karshani, she who devours, karshani. She is kshepo, the one who throws out. She is jnana, the one who knows. She is sankhya. Sankhya means the one who counts, or the one who delimits. In other words, language. She defines. She contracts, she limits, she defines. She's gati, she moves. She's nada, she resonates. She's krama, sequence. The word krama is the same as time, or sequence, or temporality. So she is temporality. She's kalanam, she is Lord Shiva's visualizing power. She is kurvati, again a reference to dynamism or doership. Kali karshini iti abhidhiyate. Abhidhiyate, she is defined as that devourer who throws out. So now she's not just a devourer, she also creates. See? She's not just a devourer. She's kshepo, the one who vomits the world, who spits the world. She's the mind, the ability to think, and the ability to use language. So she is the creator of the world, she is the mind, she is the language mechanism, she is dynamism, she is sound, so referencing the Shabda Brahmavada, the grammarian school of Bhatrahari and all that. So this is a very inclusive definition, saying that Kali, and look what Abhinav is doing, he's using his Ishta, Kali, to engage other traditions and co-opt them. He's basically saying, what all you guys are just talking about Kali. Because by Kali, I mean what all you guys mean. It's such an interesting move. It's kind of cool. Okay, another one. This one's even cooler. Okay, yeah, this one's awesome. This one is from Shittikanta and Mahanaya Prakasha. Evam Madho Eva Shakti Spandana Shila Bahir Vishayonmukhi Vyapini Bhavena Shrishti Upadesha Bhajanam Eka Eva Chinnila Dhava Bhasa Rupa Astirahata Gavati Kulaiva Paschat Pratisamhata Svabhava Agragragame Prasarat Sahaja Rupa Lakshateha. The word Lakshanam comes. We just learned that word, right? So here in Sanskrit, Lakshate. Again, definition. Abhidhiyate, lakshate. Asoyam nirupadho chitspaya dupadkrito bhedaha. And here's my translation, or my attempt at least. Again, we can translate it into how wonderful if you know the Sanskrit, then you could, right? Then I would have to do the next step. And now the next step is the danger. So disclaimer, you guys, now what I'm about to do is very dangerous. I'm about to interject. And I'm about to now translate something, meaning I'm about to interpret it. All translation is interpretation. So please always keep this in mind. Okay, that whenever I translate something, I'm obviously going to be confirming it with my bias. It's eisegesis, not exegesis. But here's the attempt. Verily is she the primordial pulsation, spanda. She's the primordial pulsation inclined towards externality, the all-pervasive receptacle of emission and wisdom. She alone is the pure awareness in which shines experiences like the color blue, etc. Nila dhava abhasa rupa, in which shines the color blue. And it would be very helpful to know some history here, because he's obviously taking on Nagarjuna in the Mula Madhyamika Karika, who uses the color blue as an example for his emptiness philosophy. Like, so being aware of Sanskrit classical literature is exciting, because you can see the way these guys are like fighting with each other in the comments, as it were, with these references. Anyway, go on. So she alone is the pure awareness in which shines experiences like the color blue, dynamic and forcefully flowing into externality. She is verily Kula, the embodied universe. And yet, or the body. She is verily your body. I translated this as the embodied universe, but now I would do this differently. I would say she is verily Kula, she's your body. You know, and so she's Kula, and yet afterwards she withdraws it back into her nature. Her spontaneous nature is found at the very edge of any arising experience. This is an invitation to contemplative practice. You know, so fighting with someone, killing your guru on the battlefield, as in the case of the Bhagavad Gita, is as good a place to realize God as doing puja. That's the teaching of the Gita, and he's saying like any cognition, at the edge of every arising cognition, she's found. So she's a liminal deity standing at the threshold of worlds, right? Like a cowboy boots wearing, cowboy hat wearing, Kali. You know, like something is like a square dancing, like, you know, like Sufi or something. Like we're just like, joking about American Indian culture today. Like the liminality of America is so exciting, because Kali is in the liminality of between waking and dreaming, between words, and before and after. So the edge, the word edge here can mean before or after. So she's at the edge of every arising experience. Duality arises in her when there are limiting adjuncts, but in truth, she shines non-differently. So, eisegesis, Kali. Now one last one. This is Shiva in Shiva equals Kali. This is how I say that. My Ishta is Shiva, but I worship Kali. Just so you don't think I'm a Shakta. I'm a Shaiva, but I'm Shakta Shaiva. I didn't understand, but the word Shakta can also refer to traditions that have more of a Vaishnava foundation, or more Vaidika foundation, which is interesting. I'm Tamil and a Shakta. It's a different thing, you know, than maybe some of the things that are represented. So, okay, coming to this is why Shiva equals Kali. So, Shrutikanta says, Shiva Subhavaiva, that's it, Shakti na vastvantaram, etyekameva Shiva vyapadesham, Shakti vyapadesham, cha vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. The essential nature of Shiva Shakti. Shiva Subhavaiva, iti Shakti. If Shiva didn't have Shakti, he would be Shava, a corpse, meaning dead. Fuck him. Who cares? I don't want a god. Who is that? I want a god who dances and sings and plays and is like angry. You know what I mean? It's like alive. I want a god who's alive. Shiva is alive. And therefore, life is the essence of the alive God. We worship the life of that God. We worship the Guru Shakti, not the Guru. Who cares about the person if that person isn't enlivened? God comes through enthusiasm, and Kali is what Shiva loves. In fact, Kali is Shiva's love. So the best thing about God is how God loves me, so I worship God's love. I worship God as a verb, not as a noun. That's Shaktism to me. You know. So here it says, the essential nature of Shiva Shakti, there is no separate reality. That which is called Shiva and that which is called Shakti is the same thing. And this next claim is crazy. Cha vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. This is the heart of Shaktism. Na vastu tattvam na purvam kinchit. And this essential reality, called Shiva, called Shakti, this non-dual reality, and this essential reality is wholly ordinary and not something bizarre. It almost sounds like Zen Buddhist here, where it's like, oh, it's in cutting apples. Yes, but it's like, but notice, it's dismissing the immanence of this world as something other than the transcendence of Kali. It's saying that humans are Kali. Every single human being is Kali, regardless of their level of spiritual realization. Every animal is Kali, whether or not you think animals can be spiritually realized. No one is more or less Kali than anyone. Every insentient object is Kali, which by the way means you shouldn't kick puja items, or you should apologize to things when you step on them. You know what I mean? It's like it justifies a lot of the ways that we Hindus interact with items. You don't think of them as items. Item. You know, don't walk into this room without acknowledging the deity. Don't make tea and drink it without giving him some. Is he not here? Is he not the guru? So then, like, the insentient object becomes important. The other day, someone came here and she bowed before the altar, and then I touched her feet. And she's like, no, hey, don't touch my feet in front of God. And I said, I'm looking at her. And she said, but that's God. And I said, that's darpana, a mirror for God. But I'm not saying you're God and that's not. I'm saying you're both God. God looking at God and God bowing to God. Now in that moment, that's my Shaivism. In that moment, I'm touching the feet of this woman in front of God because I don't believe that that woman is any less God than this is God. In fact, of these two gods, what this God taught me is to worship her there. Which means in everyone, in everything, the sentient and the insentient. Real Shaktism is an attempt to see God in all things. And more importantly, if it's God, and by God we mean that which we love the most, it is an attempt to revere all things, to love all things. And there's a certain madness to that. Oh, Shanti.